Welcome to Tales by Imon. Settle in for a story that will make you question everything you think you know. Grief is a ghost with your own face. For 20 years, that ghost has been my constant companion. It sits across from me at the breakfast table, its shape formed by the empty chair. It walks beside me on the busy streets of Chicago, a faint shimmer in my peripheral vision. The ghost has a name, Clara, and she has my face, or rather, the face I would have shared with her. My twin, the other half of my soul, extinguished like a candle flame in a sudden breeze when we were just 7 years old. They told me she drowned. It's the official story, the one cemented in time by sympathetic whispers and the heavy, granite headstone in Northbrook Cemetery. I have fragments of that day burned into my memory like sunspots on my vision. The glittering surface of Lake Michigan. The scratchy wool of the picnic blanket against my bare legs. The shared taste of a cherry popsicle, staining our identical lips a vibrant red. Clara, with her hair tied back in a single braid, just like mine, dared me to race to the old willow tree at the water's edge. I remember her laugh, a bright, tinkling sound that the wind snatched away. I remember turning back for just a second to ask Mom for another popsicle. A splash. A scream that was mine. And then, silence, filled only by the frantic shouts of adults and the cold, hollow space that opened up inside me. They found her favorite red ribbon snagged on a submerged branch. They never found her. The lake was vast and unforgiving, they said. The current was strong. It was a tragic accident. My parents, David and Carol, wrapped me in a cocoon of therapy and suffocating love, desperate to protect their remaining daughter from the jagged edges of her own memory. Dr. Evans, my therapist for the better part of a decade, called it survivor's guilt, a manifestation of trauma. My mind, he explained, was playing tricks on me, creating echoes of a person who was no longer there. And I believed them. For 20 years, I learned to live with the ghost. I named my graphic design business Gemini Studios, a private, sad little joke. I moved into a sleek, minimalist apartment downtown, a place with no history, no creaking floorboards to sound like phantom footsteps. I got engaged to Ben, a kind, logical architect who sees the world in solid lines and measurable angles. He knows all about Clara. He holds me when the nightmares come, when I wake up gasping for air, feeling the phantom chill of lake water on my skin. He is my anchor to reality. But lately, the ghost has been changing. It's no longer a faint shimmer or a sad feeling. It's becoming solid. It started 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday. I was at The Daily Grind, my usual coffee spot on Michigan Avenue, sketching ideas in my notebook. The place was humming with the morning rush, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations, the clinking of ceramic on saucer. I was waiting for my usual, an oat milk latte, when I saw her. She was standing near the pickup counter, back turned to me. But I knew that posture. The slight, almost imperceptible tilt of the head to the left when deep in thought. The cascade of auburn hair, the exact shade of my own, catching the morning light. My breath hitched. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. Lots of people have auburn hair. Then she turned to grab her coffee, and the world tilted on its axis. It was my face. Older, of course. Lined with experiences I couldn't recognize, a subtle hardness around the eyes that I didn't possess. But the architecture was identical. The same high cheekbones, the same slightly upturned nose, the same stubborn set of the jaw. She was wearing a simple gray trench coat, and her fingers, wrapped around the steaming cup, had the same long, slender shape as mine. My sketching pencil slipped from my numb hand and clattered onto the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It can't be. You're seeing things, Chloe. Dr. Evans warned you about this. Stress can trigger vivid hallucinations. But this felt different. This felt real. She looked right through me, her gaze distant and unfocused, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought our eyes would meet. I opened my mouth to say her name, but only a dry croak came out. Clara. The moment was broken by the barista calling my name. Chloe. Oat milk latte. The sound of my own name snapped her head in my direction. Her eyes, my eyes, widened for a fraction of a second. It wasn't recognition. It was something else. Fear. Annoyance. Like a wild animal startled by a sudden noise. Before I could stand, before I could push through the sudden paralysis that had gripped me, she turned, pushed the door open, and disappeared into the river of people on the sidewalk. I scrambled up, knocking my chair over with a loud crash that turned every head in the cafe. I didn't care. I ran outside, my latte forgotten. The street was a blur of faces, a sea of strangers. She was gone. Vanished as if she were never there. Whoa, Chloe, you okay? Ben's voice on the phone later that morning was a comforting balm. but it was laced with a familiar, gentle skepticism. I had called him in a panic, my words tumbling over each other. Ben, I saw her. I swear, I saw her. It was Clara. A pause. I could picture him perfectly, pinching the bridge of his nose, his brow furrowed with concern. Honey, we've talked about this. You've been working so hard on that new project. You're probably just exhausted. Your mind is tired and it's projecting. No, this was real, I insisted, my voice cracking. She looked right at me. Okay, he soothed. Just take a deep breath. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? We can order in from that Thai place you love. We'll watch a movie. Just relax. He was trying to help. He was being my anchor. But for the first time, his logic felt like a chain, pulling me down when all I wanted to do was fly after a ghost. I agreed, but the feeling of unreality lingered all day. Was I going crazy? Was the trauma finally fracturing my mind beyond repair? For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I tried to bury the memory, to label it a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by stress. I threw myself into my work, designing logos and websites until my eyes burned. But I couldn't shake the image of her face. And then it happened again. This time, I was on the Elf train, heading home after a late meeting. The carriage was half empty, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, dancing shadows. As we pulled into the Fullerton station, I saw her on the platform, waiting to get on. This time, she was wearing a dark blue beanie, but a few strands of that unmistakable auburn hair escaped. She was talking on her phone, one hand gesturing emphatically as she spoke. It was a mannerism I knew intimately because I did it myself. I watched, frozen, as the doors slid open. She stepped inside the car right next to mine, separated only by a pane of grimy glass. She was so close I could see the tiny scar above her right eyebrow, a mirror image of the one I got from falling off a swing set when we were 5. My body moved before my brain could process it. I stood up and lurched towards the connecting doors between the cars. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely work the latch. The train started moving again, swaying and rattling, throwing me off balance. I had to get to her. I had to know. I finally wrenched the door open and stumbled into the next car. It was empty. Completely, utterly empty. I spun around, my eyes scanning every seat, every corner. Nothing. It was impossible. She couldn't have just disappeared. The next stop was almost a mile away. I collapsed into a seat, my breath coming in ragged sobs. The city lights smeared into a watercolor painting of confusion and fear through the window. Was I losing my mind? Had she seen me coming and somehow slipped into another car? Or was she never there at all? I went home and didn't tell Ben. I couldn't bear to see that look of pity and concern in his eyes again. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, the image of her face on the platform replaying in my mind. The next morning, determined to prove my own sanity, I went back to the daily grind, the site of the first sighting. I sat at the same table, ordering the same drink, my eyes scanning every person who walked through the door. Hours passed. Nothing. I felt foolish, chasing a phantom. Dejected, I started to pack up my laptop. As I gathered my things, I noticed something on the floor under my table from the day of the first incident, a wadded-up napkin I must have missed when I spilled my coffee. Annoyed at myself for being messy, I bent down to pick it up and throw it away. But as I uncurled the thin paper, my blood ran cold. Doodled on the napkin in black ink was a drawing. It was a clumsy, simple little sketch, the kind you make when you're bored or on the phone. It was a lopsided, 5-petal flower with a smiley face in the center. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. It was our secret signature, a doodle Clara and I had invented when we were 6. We drew it on everything, on foggy windows, in the margins of our coloring books, on notes we passed in class. No one else knew about it. No one. My hands trembled as I stared at the drawing. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a ghost. A ghost can't drop a napkin. A ghost can't hold a pen. This was real. And if this was real, then everything they had told me for the last 20 years was a lie. The world, which had been a blurry, uncertain place for weeks, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The low hum of the coffee shop, the distant wail of a siren, the faint scent of burnt sugar in the air, it all felt hyper-real. In my hand, the flimsy napkin felt as heavy as a stone tablet, etched with a truth I could no longer ignore. This drawing, this lopsided flower, was a key. It unlocked a door in my mind I had been taught to keep bolted shut, and on the other side was not a ghost, but a flesh and blood woman who looked just like me. My twin. Alive. I stumbled out of the daily grind in a daze, the napkin clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. 20 years. 20 years of grief that wasn't mine to carry. 20 years of a life built on a foundation of lies. The anger came first, a hot, white wave that made me dizzy. Anger at my parents, at Dr. Evans, at everyone who had ever told me I was broken or haunted. Then came the fear, cold and sharp. If Clara was alive, why was she hidden? Why the elaborate charade? What could a 7-year-old girl have done that was so terrible she had to be erased from existence? I went straight home, my mind racing. Ben was already there, unpacking groceries in the kitchen of our sterile, quiet apartment. He smiled when he saw me, a warm, easy smile that usually made my shoulders relax. Today, it felt like a relic from a different life. "Hey, you're home early," he said, holding up a carton of my favorite ice cream. "Thought we could use a quiet night in." I didn't smile back. I walked over to the quartz countertop and flattened the wrinkled napkin on its cool surface, right next to a pile of fresh avocados. "Look at this," I said, my voice flat and void of emotion. He wiped his hands on a towel and leaned over, his expression shifting from cheerful to confused. "It's a flower on a napkin. Honey, what is this?" "This is the doodle Clara and I used to draw. Only we knew about it, Ben. Only us." I looked him straight in the eye, willing him to see, to understand. "The woman from the coffee shop. She dropped this. She drew this." Ben picked it up, turning it over in his hands as if it might contain a hidden set of instructions. He was an architect. He dealt in proofs, in blueprints, in things that made logical sense. A doodle on a napkin was not proof. "Chloe," he began, his voice soft and measured, the tone he used when he was trying to gently bring me back to earth. "It's a simple drawing. A flower with a face. Thousands of people could have drawn this. Maybe you even saw someone draw it as a kid, and you and your sister copied it. Or maybe you drew it yourself, when you spilled your coffee, and you just don't remember. Your mind has been under so much stress." His logic, usually a comfort, felt like an attack. He was trying to sand down the sharp edges of my reality until it was smooth and acceptable again. "Don't you get it?" I snapped, my voice rising. "This is real. She is real. I'm not crazy." "I never said you were crazy," he said, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. But his eyes were full of pity, and that was so much worse. "I just think there could be 100 other explanations before you jump to the conclusion that your parents have been lying to you for 2 decades about your sister's death." I snatched the napkin off the counter. "Then you don't believe me," I said. "It wasn't a question. I believe that you believe it," he said carefully. "And that worries me. Maybe you should call Dr. Evans." That was it. The final, crushing blow. He was siding with them, with the story that kept me small and fragile and grieving. I felt a chasm open between us, wide and dark. I turned without another word, walked into my home office, and shut the door, leaving him alone in the kitchen with the melting ice cream and his unbearable reason. I knew then that I would have to do this alone. My next step was clear. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was like steel. I picked up my phone and dialed my parents' number in Northbrook. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Chloe, honey, what a nice surprise." I took a breath. "Hi, Mom. I was just thinking about something, and I wanted to ask you about it." "Of course, sweetie. Anything." "It's about the accident," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About the day Clara, the day she drowned." The warmth in her voice instantly chilled. A familiar defensiveness crept in. "Oh, Chloe, why would you want to dredge all that up again? It's not healthy to dwell on it. I just need to remember it clearly," I pushed on, ignoring the warning bells. "What time of day was it, exactly? Who was the first person to realize she was missing?" "I don't know, honey, it was so long ago, it's all such a blur of pain," she said evasively. "Your father and I, we saw you screaming at the edge of the water. We ran over. We looked everywhere. Everyone looked everywhere. You know all of this. But did anyone see her go in the water? Did anyone actually see it happen?" There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. I heard her muffled voice, speaking to my father. Then his voice came on the phone, firm and resolute. "Chloe, this is your father. What is this about?" "I just have some questions, Dad." "There are no questions," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It was the worst day of our lives. A horrible, tragic accident. We lost our daughter. You lost your sister. Forcing your mother and me to relive the details is cruel, and it won't change anything. Clara is gone. You need to accept that. Please, for your own sake, let her rest in peace. The line went dead. He had hung up on me. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding with a fresh wave of anger and a sickening sense of validation. They were hiding something. Their reaction wasn't just pained, it was panicked. They weren't protecting me from trauma, they were protecting a secret. Okay. If no one would give me answers, I would find them myself. The woman was real, and she was in Chicago. The coffee shop was the only link I had. The next morning, I skipped work, telling my boss I had a migraine. I walked into the daily grind not as a customer, but as an investigator. The same young barista with the nose ring was working the counter. Her name tag read, Maya. I waited until there was a lull, then approached her. "Hi, excuse me," I said, trying to sound casual. "This is going to sound strange, but I need your help." She looked at me warily. "Okay." I pulled out my phone and showed her my driver's license photo. It was a terrible picture, but it was unmistakably me, and, therefore, unmistakably her. "Have you seen this woman in here before? Besides me, I mean." Maya's eyes widened slightly in recognition. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Oh wow, yeah, the other you. She comes in sometimes, maybe once or twice a month." My heart leaped. "Really? What do you know about her?" "Not much," Maya admitted, wiping down the counter. "She's super quiet. Always orders a black Americano, no room. Always pays in cash. Sits in that back corner booth and reads. Never talks to anyone. We just call her the ghost, because she's in and out so quietly." She was a regular. A real person with habits and a coffee order. "Have you seen her recently? Besides that day I saw her." Maya thought for a second, tapping her finger on the cash register. "Yeah, she was actually in last week. I remember because she did something different. She asked me for directions." I leaned forward, my entire body buzzing with anticipation. "Directions? To where?" "Some building over in the old arts district, near the river," Maya said, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to recall the name. It was an odd name, like a bird. Phoenix. That was it. She asked for the fastest way to get to the Phoenix Lofts. Phoenix Lofts. A name. A place. It was the first solid lead I'd had, a bright, shining thread in a tapestry of lies. The mythical bird that rises from the ashes. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much, Maya." I left the coffee shop and stood on the bustling sidewalk of Michigan Avenue. The city felt different now. It was no longer just my home, it was a hunting ground. She was here. My sister, Clara, or whatever name she was using now, was here. And for the first time in 20 years, the ghost I'd been chasing finally had a place to land. I just had to get there before she disappeared again. The name echoed in my mind like a mantra on the cab ride over. Phoenix Lofts. Phoenix Lofts. It was a tangible destination, a pin dropped on the map of my confusion. My hope was a wild, frantic thing, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. But beneath it, a cold dread was pooling in my stomach. What would I do if I found her? What would I say? And more terrifyingly, what if she wasn't there at all? What if this was just another dead end on a fool's errand, more proof that I was chasing shadows? The cab left the glittering steel and glass canyons of downtown Chicago and plunged into the West Loop's old arts district. The landscape changed dramatically. Gleaming skyscrapers gave way to hulking brick warehouses, their old, faded advertisements still visible like ghosts on their sides. The streets were narrower here, some still paved with worn cobblestones. It was a part of the city with grit and history, a place where things could get lost or hidden. It felt a world away from the curated, predictable life I shared with Ben. The cab pulled up in front of a massive 6-story brick building that took up half a block. A sandblasted sign above the imposing steel door read, Phoenix Lofts. It was clearly an old factory, reborn. The large, grid-paned windows were dark, hinting at the cavernous spaces within. This was it. I paid the driver, my hands fumbling with the bills, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air here smelled different, a mix of old brick, river water, and the faint, turpentine-like scent of oil paint. My heart pounded a nervous rhythm against my sternum as I pushed open the heavy front door. The lobby was vast and industrial. The floor was polished concrete, the ceiling a web of exposed pipes and ductwork. The walls were lined with large, abstract canvases, a silent testament to the building's residents. To my right was a stark, black directory board with white lettering. I rushed over to it, my eyes scanning the list of names and unit numbers, praying for a sign. Abernathy, 4B. Chen, 2A. Rodriguez, 5F. I read through the entire list, my finger tracing each name. And then I read it again. Nothing. No Miller. No familiar name at all. My hope, which had been soaring moments before, crashed. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. If she was hiding, she wouldn't be using her real name. I saw a small, frosted glass door tucked away under a staircase, labeled Building Superintendent. A sliver of light was visible underneath. Taking a chance, I knocked. A moment later, the door scraped open and a man who looked to be in his late 60s peered out. He was stout, with a graying mustache and weary eyes that had seen it all. His name tag, pinned to a grease-stained work shirt, read Sal. "Yeah, what do you want?" he grunted. "Hi," I began, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm looking for someone. I think she might live here. My sister." The word felt strange and powerful on my tongue. Sal leaned against the door frame, unimpressed. "Name on the directory?" "No, I don't think so. She might be using a different name." I pulled out my phone again, showing him the same photo from my license. "This is her. Have you seen her around?" He squinted at the phone, then back at my face. A flicker of something, recognition, annoyance, crossed his features. "Look, lady, this is a big building. People come and go. Artists, you know, they keep to themselves. If her name ain't on the board and she ain't expecting you, I can't help you. Building policy." He started to close the door. "Please," I said, a desperation in my voice that surprised even me. "It's important. She has auburn hair, just like me. About my height." He paused, his hand on the door. He let out a long, tired sigh. "Lots of girls with reddish hair in this building. Now if you'll excuse me, I got a leaky pipe in 3C that ain't gonna fix itself." He shut the door firmly in my face. Defeated, I slumped back into the lobby. The silence of the huge space felt mocking. I was so close, yet completely stuck. I couldn't just start knocking on doors. I would look insane, and worse, I would risk tipping her off. I walked back outside, the afternoon sun feeling weak and distant. I couldn't just leave. My instincts, the ones I had been told not to trust for 20 years, were screaming that she was in there. Across the street was a small, independent bookstore with a cafe in the front window. It provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the Phoenix Loft's entrance. I went inside, bought a coffee I didn't want, and took a seat at a small table by the window. And I waited. The hours crawled by. People entered and exited the lofts, a man with paint-splattered jeans, a woman hauling a cello case, a couple walking a small dog. None of them were her. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The streetlights flickered on. Doubt began to creep back in, cold and insidious. Maybe Maya the barista was mistaken. Maybe the woman just asked for directions but never came here. Maybe I was losing my mind after all. I was just about to pack up, to admit defeat for the day, when the steel door of the lofts opened one more time. And there she was. My breath caught in my chest. It was her. She was wearing dark jeans, boots, and a worn leather jacket. Tucked under her arm was a large, black artist's portfolio. She pulled a gray beanie over her auburn hair and started walking down the street, away from me, with a brisk, determined pace. I threw a $10 bill on the table and bolted out of the cafe, my purse slapping against my hip. I forced myself to slow down, to keep a safe distance. Don't spook her. Just follow. I used the growing evening shadows and the line of parked cars as cover, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. She walked for 3 blocks, her pace never slowing. I focused on the details, desperate for more proof. The way she held her shoulders, squared and confident. The way she checked for traffic before crossing the street, a quick, bird-like turn of her head. And then I saw it. A slight, almost imperceptible hesitation in her left leg with every other step. It wasn't a limp, not really, but a stiffness, a memory of an old injury. My mind flashed back to a hot summer afternoon when we were 6. Clara, always the more daring one, had climbed to the highest branch of the old oak tree in our backyard. She'd lost her footing and fallen. She'd broken her leg badly. 4 months afterward, even after the cast was off, she walked with that exact same stiffness. A detail so small, so intimate, no one else in the world would have noticed. It was the final confirmation I needed. A wave of certainty washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It was her. She turned into a small, quiet parquet that overlooked the dark, churning water of the Chicago River. She stopped at the railing, placing her portfolio on the ground and staring out at the city lights twinkling on the opposite bank. The area was deserted. This was it. It was now or never. My legs felt like lead as I closed the distance between us. With every step, a 20-year-old question screamed in my head. Why? I stopped about 10 feet behind her. The sound of my own breathing was deafening in the quiet air. I opened my mouth, and her name, a name I had only whispered in nightmares for 2 decades, came out as a raw, trembling sound. Clara! She froze. Her entire body went rigid. For a long second, she didn't move, as if my voice had turned her to stone. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned around. Her face was pale in the dim light of the park lamps, a perfect mirror of my own. But her expression was one I had never seen on my own reflection. It was a cold, hard mask of controlled panic. Her eyes, my eyes, were not filled with shock or recognition, but with a chilling, icy hostility. She took a step toward me, her voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. My name is Anya. I don't know who Clara is. She paused, her gaze unwavering and intense. And if you know what's good for you, you will stop following me. Without another word, she picked up her portfolio, turned her back on me, and walked quickly out of the park, disappearing into the darkness of the city streets. I was left standing alone by the river, shivering not from the evening cold, but from the chilling impact of her words. She was alive, and she wanted nothing to do with me. The mystery of what happened 20 years ago had just become a threat. The cold that seeped into my bones by the river had nothing to do with the autumn wind. It was a deep, internal chill of rejection and fear. I stood there long after she was gone, the echo of her words, "My name is Anya, stay away from me," replaying in a loop in my head. Anya. The name felt alien, a harsh, angular sound compared to the soft, familiar cadence of Clara. It was a shield, a wall built to keep me out. The most painful part wasn't the lie, it was the look in her eyes. There was no flicker of sisterly recognition, no hint of shared history. Only the cold, hard gaze of a stranger who wanted me gone. The threat wasn't delivered with anger, but with a chilling finality, as if she were stating a fact of the universe. The journey back to my apartment was a paranoid ordeal. Every face in the crowd on the L train seemed to be watching me. Every reflection in the dark windows looked like her. The familiar sounds of the city, the rumble of the train, the distant sirens, the chatter of fellow passengers, now felt menacing, a soundtrack to a thriller I was unwillingly starring in. She had found me twice in public. She had confronted me. What else did she know about me? Did she know where I lived? Where I worked? The safety of my carefully constructed life had been shattered, and I felt exposed and vulnerable. When I finally unlocked the door to my apartment, Ben was pacing in the living room, his face etched with worry. Chloe, my God, where have you been? I've been calling you for an hour. Your phone was going straight to voicemail. I realized I hadn't even looked at my phone. I dropped my keys and purse onto the entryway table, the clatter sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I found her, Ben, I said, my voice hoarse. He rushed over to me, his hands hovering over my arms as if he wasn't sure he should touch me. What? What are you talking about? The woman from the coffee shop. I nodded, sinking onto the edge of our sofa. And then I told him everything. The Phoenix lofts, the stakeout, the portfolio case, the limp, the specific childhood limp that no one else could possibly have. And finally, the confrontation in the park. I told him her exact words, her cold demeanor, the new name she was using. Anya. Ben listened, his expression shifting from worry to disbelief, and finally, to stunned silence. He sat down next to me, running a hand through his hair. The architect in him was scrambling, trying to fit this impossible, jagged piece into the neat blueprint of our lives. He couldn't dismiss this. I hadn't seen a ghost. I had a conversation. I was threatened. Anya, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. Chloe, this is insane. Are you absolutely sure it was her? The limp, maybe it was a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence, and you know it, I said, my voice gaining strength. You didn't see her face. You didn't hear her voice. It was her, and she's terrified of something, and she's threatening me to keep me away from it. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. Okay, I believe you saw her. I believe this woman exists. But honey, we have to consider other possibilities. A long-lost cousin you never knew about? A doppelganger who is genuinely freaked out that you're following her? And the doodle, Ben? And the limp? And the fact she has my exact face. The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. No. My parents lied. They've been lying for 20 years. Clara is alive, and they hid her away. The accusation, spoken aloud in our quiet living room, was horrifying. Ben paled. "We have to be careful here," he said, his voice low. "If what you're saying is even possibly true, we're not just talking about a family secret. This is something else. Something dangerous. Maybe we should go to the police." "And tell them what?" I shot back, the frustration boiling over. "That I think my twin sister who was declared dead 20 years ago is alive because a woman who looks like me was mean to me in a park? They'll call my parents. My parents will say I'm having a mental breakdown, and they'll have me committed. No. I can't trust anyone but myself right now." He looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw the steel in my eyes. The rift that had opened between us began to close, replaced by a shared, terrifying understanding. He was scared, but he was with me. "Okay," he whispered, pulling me into a hug that I desperately needed. "No police. But you are not doing this alone anymore. What's the next step?" Lying in bed that night, curled against Ben's side but a million miles away in my thoughts, I knew that chasing Anya was a mistake. She was a dead end, a locked door. She had made it clear she wouldn't talk. The source of the secret wasn't with her in some gritty artist's loft. The source was in a pristine, two-story colonial in the quiet suburbs of Northbrook. The answers were with my parents. But I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. They would just shut me down again. I needed proof. I needed leverage. Something they couldn't deny or explain away with concerned whispers about my mental health. An image flashed in my mind, the dusty, dimly lit attic of my childhood home. My mother was a meticulous archivist of our lives. Everything was in labeled plastic tubs. Chloe's report cards. Family vacations 1995 to 2000. And I knew, tucked away in a corner, were the boxes she never touched. The ones labeled Clara. The boxes that supposedly held the remnants of a life cut short. Photos, drawings, school projects, her favorite stuffed animal. What if there was something in there? A letter? A document? Or what if something was missing that should have been there? The official coroner's report. A death certificate. Something to prove the official story. A plan began to form, a risky and desperate idea. I couldn't just ask to see the boxes. I'd have to get in without them knowing. My parents were creatures of habit. For as long as I could remember, they played bridge with the Hendersons every Wednesday afternoon, from 1 o'clock to 4. They always left the spare key under the loose stone by the back porch. It was a 3-hour window. A chance. Ben was asleep, his breathing deep and even. The city outside was finally quiet. I felt a sliver of control, a sense of purpose returning. I had a plan. I would go back to the house where the lie began, and I would dig up the truth. As I lay there, plotting my trip to the suburbs, my phone on the nightstand beside me vibrated, a sharp buzz in the silent room. I reached over, assuming it was a late-night work email. But it was a text message. From an unknown number, the contact listed only as blocked ID. My blood ran cold. With a trembling thumb, I opened it. The message contained only 5 words. "I told you to stay away." The 5 words on my phone screen glowed in the darkness of the bedroom, a beacon of pure menace. I told you to stay away. It wasn't just a threat anymore, it was a demonstration of power. The encounter in the park was one thing, but this was an invasion. She, or someone working with her, had my personal phone number. They knew how to reach me, how to slip past the locked doors of my apartment and whisper a warning directly into my ear. The feeling of being watched was no longer paranoia, it was a certainty. Ben, who had been woken by my sharp intake of breath, read the message over my shoulder. All the color drained from his face. "Who is this?" he whispered, as if the sender could hear him. "It has to be her," I said, my voice barely audible. "Anya, or whatever her name is. Ben, how did she get my number?" He shook his head, looking as lost as I felt. "I have no idea. A private investigator? Some kind of online search. Chloe, this changes everything. This isn't just some old family secret you're digging up. These people are serious. You can't go to Northbrook. It's too dangerous." The fear was a living thing inside me, coiling in my gut. He was right. It was dangerous. But backing down felt even more so. "Don't you see?" I argued, sitting up and turning to face him. "This is exactly why I have to go. Hiding won't work. They already know how to find me. The only way I'll ever be safe is if I find out what they're so desperate to protect. What happened 20 years ago that is worth threatening me over now? I'm not running from this, Ben. I can't. We argued for nearly an hour, his desperate pleas for my safety crashing against my stubborn resolve. He saw the risk. I saw the necessity. Finally, seeing he couldn't change my mind, his expression hardened with a decision of his own. Fine, he said, his voice firm. I'm not letting you go alone. If you're going into that house, I'm going with you. We're in this together. The drive to Northbrook on Wednesday was thick with a tense, unspoken anxiety. It was a route I had traveled 1,000 times, a familiar passage from my adult life in the city back to the roots of my childhood. But today, every landmark was tainted. The big willow tree in the park where we used to have picnics, the corner ice cream shop we'd bike to in the summer, the quiet, tree-lined streets. It all felt like a movie set, a cheerful facade built to conceal a dark and rotten truth. These weren't memories of a happy childhood anymore. They were pieces of an elaborate lie I was only just beginning to comprehend. We parked a block away from my parents' house, watching from the car as my mother's sensible sedan pulled out of the driveway at precisely 10 minutes to 1, right on schedule. We gave them 15 minutes to be safely at the Hendersons before we moved. Walking up the familiar flagstone path, my heart hammered against my ribs. The house looked exactly as it always had, perfectly manicured lawn, cheerful yellow door, a symbol of suburban tranquility. It felt obscene. Okay, Ben whispered, squeezing my hand. Let's be quick. The spare key was right where it always was, under the loose stone next to the rose bushes. The lock turned with a familiar click, and we slipped inside through the back door, closing it silently behind us. The house was eerily quiet, filled with the scent of lemon polish and my mother's potpourri. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, marking the seconds we were stealing. Every creak of the floorboards under our feet sounded like a gunshot. The attic, I mouthed, leading the way up the carpeted stairs, avoiding the one I knew always creaked. The pull-down ladder to the attic was in the hallway ceiling. Ben held it steady as I climbed into the hot, stuffy darkness, the air thick with the smell of old wood, dust, and forgotten time. He followed me up, pulling the ladder shut behind us, and we were plunged into near darkness, save for the weak light filtering through a single grimy circular window at the far end of the wall. My mother's infamous storage tubs were stacked neatly against one wall, their white labels facing out. I scanned them quickly, my phone's flashlight beam dancing across the plastic. Holiday decorations. David's college textbooks. Chloe ages 5 to 10. And then, in the very back, covered by an old sheet, was a smaller stack of 3 tubs. The labels were written in my mother's perfect cursive, Clara. My hands trembled as I pulled the top tub down. Ben held the light steady as I lifted the lid. Inside were the relics of a stolen childhood. A threadbare stuffed bear with one button eye. A stack of drawings, many of them featuring our secret 5-petal flower. A music box that no longer played. It was exactly what I expected, and it was devastating. We moved through the boxes quickly, a frantic and heartbreaking excavation of a life. It was in the bottom of the third and final box, tucked beneath a small, hand-knitted pink blanket, that we found it. A thick, brown manila folder with no label. It felt cold to the touch. With a sense of profound dread, I opened it on the dusty floor. It wasn't a death certificate. It wasn't a coroner's report. The documents inside were from a place I'd never heard of, the Meadowbrook Institute for Youth. The logo was a serene-looking tree. It looked less like a school and more like a medical facility. Inside were pages and pages of psychological evaluations, behavioral reports, and intake forms for a Jane Doe, age 7, dated just a few weeks after Clara had supposedly drowned. The reports described a child who was prone to violent outbursts, exhibited sociopathic tendencies, and was at significant danger to herself and others. My mind couldn't process the words. This wasn't the Clara I remembered. My Clara was bright and funny and full of life. This was a monster. And then I saw it. Clipped to the inside of the folder was a small Polaroid photograph. It was of Clara, taken in a sterile-looking room. She was wearing a plain gray jumper. Her hair was cut short and uneven. But it was her face, no question. She wasn't smiling. She was staring at the camera with a look of pure, defiant fury. This was the hardness I'd seen in Anya's eyes. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my mother's elegant handwriting, was a short, damning sentence. October 1999. It's better this way. We can finally be safe. The air left my lungs in a rush. Drowned. No. She wasn't the victim of a tragic accident. She was the cause of one. They hadn't lost her. they had gotten rid of her. They had locked her away because they were afraid of her. This whole time, I had been grieving a sister who was murdered by the lake, but the truth was infinitely more horrific. I had been living the life of the good twin, while the bad one was erased. As this new monstrous reality crashed down on me, Ben suddenly grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. His face was white with terror. He didn't say a word, just pointed a shaking finger toward the small, circular attic window that overlooked the driveway. I followed his gaze just in time to see the slow, deliberate crunch of tires on the gravel drive. My mother's sedan was pulling in. From downstairs, we heard the unmistakable, deafening rumble of the garage door opening. Bridge Club was over. They were home. And we were trapped in the attic with their darkest secret in our hands. The rumble of the garage door was a physical force, a wave of sound that vibrated up through the floorboards and seized my heart in an icy grip. Panic, cold and absolute, erupted in the dusty silence of the attic. For a split second, Ben and I were paralyzed, two deer caught in the headlights, the damning manila folder lying open between us on the floor. "Put it back," Ben hissed, his voice a choked whisper. He sprang into action, his architectural mind seeing angles and exits where I only saw a trap. We scrambled, shoving the folder, the reports, and the hateful little Polaroid back into the bottom of the tub. My hands were clumsy, shaking so badly I could barely fit the lid back on. We shoved the tub back into its place behind the others, a futile attempt to hide our trespass. Where do we hide?" I whispered, my eyes darting around the cluttered space. "There," Ben pointed to a dark corner, where a massive, dome-topped steamer trunk stood next to a stack of old vinyl record boxes and a dressmaker's mannequin draped in a white sheet. It was a cavern of shadows. We scurried over, squeezing ourselves into the narrow space between the trunk and the wall, pulling the sheet from the mannequin to create a makeshift curtain. We crouched in the darkness, dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the window, and held our breath. The sounds from downstairs were unnervingly clear. The familiar slam of the car doors. The beep of the security alarm being disarmed. The jingle of my father's keys as he dropped them into the ceramic bowl on the hall table. Then, their voices. "I cannot believe Susan Henderson had the nerve to lead with a spade." My mother's voice drifted up, sharp with indignation. "After I explicitly told her last week that it's a rookie mistake." "She always does that, Carol," my father's placating rumble replied. "You know how she is. Is there any of that iced tea left?" The sheer, staggering normalcy of it was what terrified me the most. They were discussing a bridge game while, 2 floors above them, their entire fabricated world was collapsing. Crouched in the dark, clutching a secret that could destroy us all, I felt like a ghost haunting my own past. Then, I heard my mother's footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. Ben's hand shot out and gripped my arm, his fingers digging in a silent command. "Don't move. Don't breathe." The footsteps stopped in the upstairs hallway, directly below the pull-down ladder. We heard the squeak of the linen closet door. My mother hummed a tuneless little melody. Suddenly, a floorboard directly under my foot let out a long, agonized groan. The sound was horrifyingly loud in the stillness. The humming stopped. Ben and I froze, my muscles screaming in protest. A silence stretched for an eternity. We heard her take a step back into the middle of the hallway. "David," she called out, her voice sharpened with a slight edge of confusion. "Did you come upstairs?" My blood ran cold. This was it. She knew. From downstairs, my father's voice called back, muffled by the distance. "No, I'm right here. Just getting the tea." Another beat of silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing my mother standing there, her head tilted, listening. I braced myself for the sound of her hand on the attic ladder, for the inevitable flood of light that would expose us. She finally muttered, her voice faint. "Old houses." Her footsteps retreated, heading back down the stairs. Ben and I let out a simultaneous, silent breath we hadn't realized we were holding. My entire body trembled with adrenaline. Downstairs, a new sound provided a sliver of hope, the familiar, cheerful theme music of the 5 o'clock news. The television was on. It was our shield, a blanket of noise that might just be thick enough to cover our escape. "Now," Ben whispered, his lips close to my ear. "It's now or never. We go the way we came. Slowly, one step at a time." He moved first, a shadow detaching from the deeper darkness. He reached the ladder and, with painstaking slowness, began to lower it. Each click of the extending metal felt like a thunderclap. When it was fully down, he gestured for me to go first. My legs were stiff and shaky as I climbed down, my feet finding the rungs by feel. The air in the upstairs hallway was cool and fresh after the stuffy confines of the attic. Ben followed, pulling the ladder up just enough to re-engage the latch without making it snap shut. We stood for a moment, listening to the news anchor's voice droning on from the living room. Then, we began the most terrifying part of the journey, the main staircase. It was long and open, offering a potential line of sight to the living room entrance. We stayed close to the wall, placing each foot down with the slow, deliberate care of a bomb disposal expert. We were halfway down when my foot, slick with sweat inside my shoe, slipped slightly on the wooden tread, my hip bumping against the wall with a soft but distinct thump. The television noise stopped. The house fell silent. What was that? My mother's voice, sharp and clear. We froze on the stairs, completely exposed. My heart stopped. I was certain they would stand up, walk into the hall, and find us there. It's nothing, Carol, my father's voice replied, laced with weary patience. Probably just the ice maker in the fridge. It's been making that noise for weeks. A moment later, the volume on the television went up, louder than before. It was the cover we needed. We didn't wait. We scurried down the rest of the stairs and made a beeline for the back door. My hands were so slick with sweat I could barely turn the deadbolt. With one final, silent click, we were out. We slipped through the perfectly manicured backyard and didn't stop running until we had turned the corner and the house was out of sight. We collapsed into Ben's car, gasping for air, our lungs burning. The manila folder was on my lap, a toxic object radiating a terrible heat. I had done it. I had the proof. But the proof was a horror story, and I was holding the first chapter. Drive, I choked out. Just drive. Ben started the car and pulled away from the curb, merging into the stream of evening commuters heading back towards the city. The manicured lawns and peaceful houses of Northbrook slid by the window, a dream turning into a nightmare in the rearview mirror. I opened the folder again, staring at the Polaroid of the furious 7-year-old girl who shared my face. Who was she? What had she done to make our parents so afraid they would erase her from our lives? As we merged onto the Edens Expressway, the towering skyline of Chicago rising ahead of us like a promise of anonymity, my phone began to ring. The sound was shrill and violent in the quiet car. I fumbled for it, my blood turning to ice as I saw the screen. It was a photo of my mother and me, taken last Christmas, smiling by the tree. The caller ID was simple, Mom. She was calling. Now, the timing was too perfect, too coincidental. She knows, I whispered, my voice trembling as I showed the phone to Ben. She must know. The phone continued its insistent, terrifying summons, ringing and ringing, demanding to be answered. The ringing of the phone was a siren in the enclosed space of the car, each chime a separate jolt to my frayed nerves. The smiling face of my mother on the screen was a grotesque parody of the woman whose dark secret I was holding in my lap. Don't answer it, Ben said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Just let it go to voicemail. We don't know what she knows. It could be a trap. If I don't answer, she'll know something's wrong, I argued, my thumb hovering over the green accept icon. She'll call Ben, she'll call my work. Ignoring her is an admission of guilt. I have to answer. I have to act normal. Can you? He asked, his eyes filled with a desperate concern. I have to, I whispered, and with a deep, shuddering breath, I swiped to answer, putting the phone on speaker. Hi, Mom, I said, praying my voice didn't betray the terror that was making my teeth chatter. Chloe, sweetie. I'm so glad I caught you, she chirped, her voice the same warm, familiar sound it had always been. It was the voice that had read me bedtime stories and soothed me after nightmares. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I was just calling to check in. How was your day? It was fine, I managed, gripping the manila folder so tightly my fingers ached. Just busy. We're on the way home from a client meeting. The lie slipped out surprisingly easily. Oh, that's nice, she said, followed by a brief pause. It's funny, you know. When your father and I got home, I could have sworn I heard a noise upstairs. Right from the attic, of all places. This old house just creaks and groans, doesn't it? My blood turned to ice. It wasn't an accusation, but it was a test. A baited line cast into the water to see what would bite. Ben shot me a wide-eyed, panicked look. I forced a light laugh, a sound that felt brittle and foreign in my own throat. It always has. I'm surprised you haven't found ghosts up there by now. Ha! Don't be silly, she said. I was also just thinking about our last phone call. You sounded so upset. I just wanted to make sure you were feeling a bit better. I am, Mom. Really, I lied again, the words tasting like ash. Just a stressful week at work. I'm sorry if I worried you. Of course not, dear. Well, I won't keep you. Drive safe. I love you. "I love you too," I said, and the words nearly choked me. I ended the call and stared at the dark screen, my entire body trembling. We drove the rest of the way back to my apartment in a heavy, unnerving silence. We didn't know if we had passed her test or failed miserably. The ambiguity was its own form of torture. Back in the apartment, with the door double locked and the security chain slid into place, we finally allowed the adrenaline to recede, leaving us exhausted and raw. The folder sat on the coffee table between us, a toxic presence in the sleek, modern room. "She was probing," Ben said, finally breaking the silence. That comment about the attic was not a coincidence. "I know," I said, "but we can't worry about that right now. We have to focus on this." I gestured to the folder. "We need to know everything about the Meadowbrook Institute." We opened our laptops, the glow of the screens illuminating our pale faces. We sat side by side on the sofa, a 21st century detective team fueled by fear and Wi-Fi. My first search for the Meadowbrook Institute brought up very little. A defunct address, a few mentions in old business registries. It had vanished. But Ben, ever the architect, was more methodical. He started searching archived newspaper articles from the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times. And that's when we found it. The institute hadn't just closed, it had been shut down. An explosive series of articles from 2008 detailed a massive state investigation. The place had been a warehouse for the unwanted children of wealthy Chicago families, a private, expensive, and deeply corrupt institution. The articles were filled with horrifying allegations from former staff and patients, illegal use of restraints, experimental behavioral therapies, falsified medical records, and systemic psychological abuse. It wasn't a school or a hospital. It was a prison with a pretty logo. My parents hadn't just sent Clara away, they had sent her to hell. As we scrolled through the grim accounts, a single name appeared again and again, like a recurring villain in a horror story, Dr. Alastair Finch. He was the founder and director of Meadowbrook, the chief architect of its controversial methods. The articles painted him as a charismatic monster, a man who charmed desperate parents with promises of a cure for their difficult children while running a house of horrors behind closed doors. He was the one who developed the containment therapy mentioned in Clara's, or Anya's, reports. He was the one who had signed off on every page. He lost his medical license, Ben read from an article, his voice low. The state brought a case against him, but it was settled out of court. He just disappeared after that. A man like that doesn't just disappear. He hides. On a hunch, Ben opened a public records database he used for work to research property owners. He typed in the name, Alastair Finch. For a minute, nothing happened. Then, a single result popped up. It was a property tax record, updated just last month. "I've got him," Ben whispered, his voice electric. "He owns a small house, registered in his name." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Where?" Ben zoomed in on the map, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "It's a small town in Wisconsin, Lakeside, just over the state line, about a 2-hour drive from here." We stared at the screen, at the small pin on the map that marked a quiet, unassuming house in a quiet, unassuming town. Inside that house lived the man who held the key. He wasn't just a name in a folder anymore. He was a destination. He was the man who could tell me exactly what my parents paid him to do to my sister. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to go and find him. The address on the laptop screen seemed to hum with a dangerous energy. Lakeside, Wisconsin. Dr. Alastair Finch. A name and a place that, just hours ago, were buried in the past, now represented the single, terrifying focal point of our future. The threats, the lies, the 2 decades of suffocating grief, every road had led to this quiet house 2 hours north. "We have to go," I said, the words tasting of grim certainty. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the text from Anya and the phone call from my mother had burned away my hesitation. Hiding was not an option. Waiting was not an option. The only way out was through. "I know," Ben said, his voice low. He closed his laptop and looked at me, his face a mixture of fear and resolve. "But we have to be smart about this, Chloe. We're not dealing with a simple family secret anymore. Your sister, your parents, they're actively trying to scare you off. Finch is the heart of it all. Walking up to him is like walking into the hornet's nest." "Then we'll be careful," I insisted. "We won't go in blind. But we're going. Tomorrow morning." We packed a small overnight bag in a daze, the simple acts of folding clothes and grabbing toothbrushes feeling surreal. We were preparing for a road trip, but it felt like we were preparing for war. Sleep was a restless, dream-filled ordeal. and we were on the road before the sun had fully risen, a thermos of coffee sitting untouched between us. The drive north out of Chicago was a journey through a changing landscape. The concrete and steel of the city slowly gave way to the sprawling suburbs, which in turn melted into the open rolling farmland of northern Illinois. When we crossed the state line into Wisconsin, the scenery became almost painfully beautiful. Deep blue lakes glittered through gaps in the trees, and the countryside was a patchwork of green and gold under a crisp autumn sky. The peaceful, idyllic setting was a cruel joke, a beautiful mask hiding the ugliness of our destination. What do you think she was really like? I asked quietly, breaking a long silence as we drove past a serene-looking dairy farm. Ben glanced over at me. "Who?" "Clara," I said. "The girl in that file, the monster they described. I can't connect her to the sister I remember. I remember us laughing until our sides hurt. I remember her sharing the last bite of her cookie with me. I remember holding her hand. Was that all a lie? Or was I just the good twin, so I never saw the bad side?" "Or," Ben said gently, reaching over to squeeze my hand, "she was a 7-year-old kid with problems, and your parents took the easy way out, with the help of a monster who told them it was the right thing to do. You're not going to find the real Clara in that file, Chloe. That file is what they wanted her to be." He was right, but the conflict raged within me. The entire foundation of my identity was built on being the surviving twin, the one who was left. What did it mean if she wasn't gone, but had been cast out? Lakeside, Wisconsin, was exactly as quaint as its name suggested. We passed a town square with a gazebo, a bakery with a line out the door, and streets lined with charming, well-kept houses. It was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked, a place where deep, dark secrets seemed an impossibility. We found Dr. Finch's street easily. It was quiet and shaded by ancient maple trees. His house was a modest, single-story bungalow, painted a soft gray with white trim. A perfectly manicured lawn and a small, tidy garden sat out front. It was the picture of peaceful retirement. The banality of it was nauseating. This was where the man who ruined my sister's life, who helped my parents perpetrate a 20-year lie, had come to live out his golden years in peace. "We can't just knock on the door," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as Ben parked our car down the block, partially hidden by a large oak tree. "He'll call the police, or worse, he'll call my parents." "I agree," Ben said, his eyes scanning the quiet house. "We need a pretext. A reason to get him talking. His ego." We spent the next hour in the car, workshopping a plan. We settled on a classic. I would go to the door alone the next morning. I would be Chloe Miller, a graduate student from Northwestern University's sociology department, writing a thesis on controversial child psychology practices of the 1990s. I would tell him I came across his name as a pioneer in the field and wanted to interview him for my paper, appealing to the vanity and ego that must still be simmering under his quiet retirement. Ben would wait in the car, a block away, with his phone ready to record our conversation if I could get him to agree, and ready to call for help if things went wrong. It was a flimsy plan, but it was the only one we had. Having decided, we sat in silence for a while, just watching, waiting for a sign of life. The street was still. The house was quiet. "Maybe we should get a hotel room, come back in the morning," Ben suggested, his voice weary. "Just a little longer," I said, my eyes fixed on the gray house. And then, it happened. The front door of the bungalow opened, and an elderly man with a shock of white hair and a stooped posture stepped out onto the porch. He looked frail, harmless. Dr. Finch. He bent down to pick up a newspaper from his doorstep. But he wasn't alone. Another man, tall and familiar, was following him out of the house. The two men stood on the porch for a moment, talking. Dr. Finch nodded, and the other man clapped him on the shoulder in a gesture of familiar finality. Then, the visitor turned and walked down the short path to a dark blue sedan parked in the driveway. A sedan I had seen 1,000 times. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp. Ben saw it at the same moment, his hand instinctively grabbing my arm. The man got into the car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. He drove down the quiet street, heading right for us. As the car passed, the afternoon sun glinted off the windshield, but not before I saw the face behind the wheel, clear as day. His expression was grim, his jaw set. It was my father. The world outside the car window seemed to go into slow motion. My father, his expression grim and purposeful, drove past our parked car without a glance. He was a ghost from my real life, haunting this new, terrifying reality I'd stumbled into. For a long silent moment after his car disappeared down the street, neither of us moved. We just sat there, encased in the bubble of our car, the engine idling softly. The sight had been so stunning, so utterly world-shattering, that my brain simply refused to process it. He was just in there, Ben finally breathed out, his voice a ragged whisper. Your dad was just in that house. With that man. The paralysis broke, and a tidal wave of pure hot rage crashed over me, so intense it made me gasp. The grief, the confusion, the fear, it was all incinerated in this sudden inferno of betrayal. My father. Not just a liar from 20 years ago, but an active present-day conspirator. He wasn't just protecting an old secret. He was maintaining it. He knows, I said, the words coming out low and venomous. He knows I'm getting close. That's why he's here. He came here to warn Finch. My God, Chloe, he might have shown him your picture, Ben said, his mind catching up to the terrifying implications. Finch knows who you are. He knows what you look like. Your plan to go there as a student is worthless, I finished, my voice flat. It's a trap now. The whole town is a trap. The quaint, peaceful facade of Lakeside now seemed sinister, a spider's web, and we were two flies who had just narrowly avoided landing in it. We have to go, Ben said, his hands immediately moving to put the car in drive. We have to get out of here right now. He didn't need to tell me twice. He pulled a sharp U-turn and we sped out of the quiet residential street, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see my father's car or a police cruiser appear behind us. The beautiful scenery on the drive back to Chicago was a blur. My mind was racing, connecting the dots with a horrifying new clarity. It wasn't a series of coincidences. It was a sequence of events. Anya appears. I see her. I start asking my parents questions. My mother gets defensive and my father hangs up on me. Anya threatens me in the park. The anonymous text appears on my phone. And now, my father meets with the disgraced doctor who started it all. They weren't reacting to events. They were managing a crisis. My crisis. They're all in it together, I said, staring blankly at the highway stretching out before us. Anya, my parents, maybe even Finch. They're working together. To do what? Ben asked, though I think he already knew the answer. To keep me quiet. To make me stop digging. Ben, that first threat from Anya in the park, that was probably her own idea. But the text message, the one with my phone number, my parents gave it to her. They had to have. They're helping her threaten me. The betrayal was a physical pain, a sharp twisting in my gut that was worse than anything I had felt before. My own parents were helping a stranger, my own sister, to terrorize me into submission. The family I thought I had was an illusion. Ben and I were on one side, and on the other was a confederacy of my own blood, bound together by a secret so dark they would do anything to protect it. We didn't speak again until we were back in my apartment, the door locked and bolted behind us. The sense of safety, however, was gone. My home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a target. Ben began pacing the length of the living room, a caged animal. Okay, so what do? We can't go to Finch. We can't go to your parents. We can't go to the police. Every official door is closed to us. And we can't just sit here and wait for them to make the next move, I added, the rage beginning to solidify into a cold, hard resolve. I walked over to the window and looked down at the sprawling city below. For weeks, I had been the one who was haunted, the one who was hunted. I had been reacting, always one step behind. That was over. We changed the game, I said, turning back to face him. We've been focusing on the past, on what happened 20 years ago at Meadowbrook. That's what they expect us to do. We need to focus on the present. We need to find out who Anya is now. Ben stopped pacing. What do you mean? How? Her apartment, I said, the idea forming sharp and clear in my mind. The Phoenix Lofts. Everything we need to know about her life is in there. Who is she pretending to be? Where does she get money? Is there a name, a driver's license, a bank statement? Is she really an artist? Is she in contact with our parents? The answers aren't in Wisconsin. They're right here, in that apartment. Ben stared at me, his eyes wide. Chloe, you can't be serious. You want to break into her apartment? That's insane. It's a felony. What if she's there? What if you get caught? I walked over to him, my gaze unflinching. The fear was still there, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was the fear of failure, not the fear of a monster in the dark. I was done being afraid of them. My entire life is a crime scene, Ben, I said, my voice low and steady, with a hardness I didn't recognize. They stole my sister, they faked her death, they lied to me every single day for 20 years. My own father is conspiring with the man who tortured her. They are threatening me into silence. I think we are far past the point of worrying about a breaking and entering charge. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the love, the fear for my safety, the logical part of his brain screaming that this was a terrible idea. But he also saw the look on my face. He saw that the grieving, uncertain woman he loved was gone, and in her place was someone he didn't know. Someone who would not be stopped. I'm getting into that apartment, I said, leaving no room for argument. The only question is, are you going to help me? Ben stared at me, his face a battleground of conflicting emotions. I could see the logic warring with the loyalty, the fear fighting the fierce, protective love in his eyes. He opened his mouth to argue again, to list all the perfectly rational reasons why breaking into a private residence was a catastrophic idea. But then he saw my expression. He saw that the part of me that listened to reason had been burned away, replaced by a cold, unshakable resolve. I wasn't asking for his permission. I was telling him what was going to happen next. He let out a long, shuddering breath, raking a hand through his hair. Okay, he said, his voice strained. Okay, you're right. We're past the point of playing by the rules. He took a step toward me, his eyes locking onto mine. But if you're going to do something this crazy, you are not doing it alone. We plan this. My way. We do it smart, or we don't do it at all. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I wasn't alone in this. Okay, Ben, I whispered. Your way. True to his word, the architect took over. For the next 24 hours, our apartment became a command center for a two-person intelligence operation. Ben insisted on a full day of surveillance before we made any move. So the next morning, we were back in our car, parked in a different spot with a clear view of the Phoenix Loft's entrance. The hours ticked by. We watched residents come and go, our conversation limited to tense whispers. Finally, at 9:15 a.m., she emerged. Anya. Dressed in black jeans and a jacket, portfolio case in hand, she walked to the nearest station and disappeared into the morning commute. We stayed, watching, all day. The door didn't open again until 5:45 p.m., when she returned, looking tired. That's our window, Ben said, making a note in a small black book. Roughly 9 hours. It's more than enough time. While I kept watch, Ben was on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was digging into the city's public records, searching for anything related to the building's conversion from a factory to residential lofts. Late in the afternoon, he found it, a set of archived architectural plans from the redevelopment in the late 90s. I've got our way in, he said, his voice low and excited. He turned the laptop toward me, showing me a detailed floor plan. The building is historically protected, so they couldn't alter certain external features. The corner units on the 4th floor, units 4J and 4K, still have their original fire escapes. And the window assemblies weren't fully upgraded. They're single-latch sash windows. Old. Vulnerable. How do we know which unit is hers? I asked. We don't, he admitted. But the barista said she likes the back corner booth. People are creatures of habit. My bet is she'd choose a corner unit. We'll have to check both. The next day, we were ready. We dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. In a small backpack, Ben packed our toolkit, 2 pairs of black leather gloves, a slim pry bar, a set of small tension wrenches, and 2 powerful LED flashlights. The mood was grim. There was no excitement, only the cold, heavy weight of necessity. We arrived at the Phoenix Lofts just after noon, the quietest time of day. We loitered near the entrance until a resident left, catching the heavy steel door just before it swung shut. We were in. The industrial lobby was cool and silent. We ignored the elevator and took the concrete service stairs, our soft-soled shoes making no sound. The 4th floor hallway felt like a vacuum, sucking all the air from my lungs. The doors were unmarked save for their numbers and letters. We found 4J and 4K at the far end of the hall. I put my ear to the door of 4J and heard the faint sound of a television. My heart sank. Occupied. That left one option. We stood before 4K, listening. Silence. This had to be it. The window, Ben mouthed, pointing toward the end of the hall where the fire escape access was. The window leading out to the fire escape was old and stiff, but Ben managed to jimmy it open. A gust of cold, city air hit us. We slipped out onto the rusty metal platform, the traffic noise from 4 stories below suddenly loud. The fire escape was narrow, the metal groaning under our weight. We crept along the platform until we were outside the windows of Unit 4K. Ben knelt, pulling a thin piece of metal from his pocket. He slid it expertly into the gap between the window sashes. My job was to watch the hallway, to watch the street below. Every nerve in my body was on fire. This was it. The point of no return. After a few agonizingly long seconds of scraping and maneuvering that sounded to me like a symphony of sirens, I heard a soft click. Ben looked up at me and nodded, his face pale but determined. Together, we carefully slid the old window up, creating a gap just large enough to climb through. Ben went first, disappearing into the darkness. I followed, my heart pounding in my throat, and dropped silently to the floor beside him. We were in. We stood perfectly still for a moment, letting our eyes adjust to the dim light. The apartment was cool and quiet. It was a large, open-plan studio, but it felt empty. The furniture was sparse and functional, a simple bed in the corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a single bookshelf. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a temporary hiding place, a room a person could flee from at a moment's notice. There were canvases stacked against one wall, just as I'd imagined, but most of them were either blank or had been painted over in angry black strokes. But none of that was what held our attention. None of that was what made the air in my lungs turn to ice. It was the far wall. The entire wall was covered in a massive corkboard. It was a chaotic, intricate web of red and black strings, connecting dozens of photographs, maps of Chicago, pages of handwritten notes, and printed documents. It was an investigation board, a conspiracy board, a hunting board. And there, at the absolute center, the focal point of all the intersecting lines, the dark heart of the entire twisted web, was a photograph. It was a candid shot, clearly taken with a zoom lens. It showed me, sitting alone at a table, sketching in my notebook, a cup of coffee at my elbow. It was a picture of me at the daily grind, on the very morning my world had begun to fall apart. I hadn't just been a chance encounter. I had been the target all along. The first coherent thought that broke through the static in my brain was a simple, chilling one. We never should have come here. The apartment wasn't just a home, it was a predator's den, and the wall was a testament to its owner's singular, terrifying focus. Me. Ben and I stood frozen just inside the window, the city's muted sounds filtering in behind us, a world away from the cold, obsessive silence of this room. The candid photo of me, circled in a thick, angry red, was like an eye staring back at us. It was a violation so profound it stole the breath from my lungs. This wasn't the work of a frightened woman in hiding. This was the meticulous, patient work of a hunter studying her prey. "She's been watching you," Ben whispered, his voice full of a dawning horror. "For how long?" Slowly, as if moving through deep water, we approached the wall. The closer we got, the more the chaotic web resolved into a horrifyingly detailed map of my life. There were more photos of me, dozens of them, all candid shots. Me walking into my office building. Me laughing with Ben on a park bench. Me loading groceries into my car. But it wasn't just me. There was a photo of Ben, taken from across the street from his architecture firm, a small, handwritten note pinned beside it. The architect. The anchor. Her weakness. There was a picture of my parents' house in Northbrook, looking peaceful and serene. The note next to it read, "The cage. The liars." There was even a photo of Sal, the grumpy superintendent from this very building, with a question mark scrawled beside it. The strings connected everything. A red string linked my office to our apartment. Another linked my apartment to my parents' house. A black string, thick and ominous, connected the photo of my parents to a printed document that, upon closer inspection, was an article about the Meadowbrook Institute. This wasn't just surveillance. It was a thesis. Anya wasn't just watching me, she was deconstructing my life, trying to understand how it worked, who the key players were, and what their relationships were to each other. In the center of it all was me, with the terrifying label pinned beneath my coffee shop photo. Subject C. The replacement. Does she know what she is? What does that mean, the replacement? I whispered, tracing the words with a trembling finger. "She thinks you took her life," Ben said, his voice grim. "And she's trying to figure out if you were a willing participant." We had to move. We didn't know when she would be back. The carefully planned window of time we'd relied on now felt meaningless. A person this meticulous, this obsessive, could also be unpredictable. We split up, our movements quick and silent. Ben started in the small kitchenette, opening the nearly empty cupboards and refrigerator. I went to the small desk in the corner. There was a laptop, but it was password protected and useless to us. The drawers were filled with art supplies, charcoal, pencils, brushes, but nothing personal. No letters, no bills, no junk mail. This person had no paper trail. This person, Anya, barely existed. I moved to the bed. It was neatly made, a simple gray duvet pulled tight. The nightstand beside it had a single locked drawer. "Ben, give me that pry bar," I whispered. He brought it over, and with a sharp, splintering crack, I forced the drawer open. It was mostly empty, save for a thick stack of $100 bills bound with a rubber band. So this is how she lived. Someone was funding her. My parents. The meeting with Finch. It was all starting to make sense. But beneath the cash was something else. A small, cloth-wrapped bundle. My fingers, clumsy from the adrenaline, fumbled with the string. I unwrapped it to reveal a small, tarnished silver object. My heart stopped. It was a locket. Heart-shaped, with a small floral engraving on the front. I knew it instantly. Our grandmother had given us a matching set for our 6th birthday. I had lost mine on a school field trip years ago and had been devastated. But Clara had cherished hers. With a trembling thumb, I clicked the tiny latch. It sprang open. On the right side was a miniature, perfectly preserved photo of my mother, 20 years younger, her hair long, her smile bright and genuine. It was a picture of a woman before the lie, before the darkness. On the left side, where a matching photo of our father should have been, there was only a mess of violent, angry scratches. The photo had been there once, but someone had taken a pin, or a knife, or a shard of glass and had systematically, viciously, scraped the image away until nothing was left but a gouged and silvered surface. It was an act of pure, concentrated hatred. This wasn't just about a stolen life. This was about a deep, personal betrayal. A daughter's rage against the mother who had cast her out. As I stared at the desecrated locket, the full weight of my sister's pain hitting me for the first time, Ben's voice cut through the silence, sharp and urgent. Chloe, you need to see this. Now. I looked up. He was kneeling by the bed, pointing into the dark space underneath. I scrambled over, my flashlight beam joining his. He had found a small, worn backpack, a go bag, packed and ready. But that wasn't what he was pointing at. Lying on the floor next to the bag was a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of a train ticket. A one-way ticket on the Metra Up North line, departing from the Ogilvy Transportation Center. My eyes scanned the details, my blood running cold. The departure time was in less than an hour. The destination was Northbrook. The printed details on the train ticket seemed to burn themselves onto my retinas. Northbrook. A one-way trip. A departure time that was rapidly approaching. The realization hit us both at the same moment, a silent, sickening crash. All this time, we thought we were the ones pushing the action forward, uncovering the clues, getting closer to the truth. We were wrong. We had been chasing a ghost, while the real woman was making a move of her own. While we were breaking into her fortress, she was on her way to the heart of the conspiracy. She's going to confront them, Ben said, his voice strained with disbelief. Tonight. The clock in my head started a frantic, deafening countdown. There was no more time for careful searching or quiet contemplation. Every second we spent in this apartment was a second we were losing. The board, Ben said, already pulling out his phone. I need pictures. The locket, I replied, my fingers closing around the cold, tarnished silver in my pocket. It felt both like a clue and a sacred object, the last remnant of a shared past. I'm taking it. While Ben took 3 quick, blurry photos of the conspiracy wall, a chaotic, incomplete record of my sister's obsession, I did a final, desperate scan of the room. There was nothing else small enough or important enough to risk taking. The cash, the laptop, it was all a trap waiting to happen. We had what we came for, and a terrifying new mission. Our escape was a clumsy, frantic reversal of our entry. We scrambled back out the window onto the fire escape, my foot catching on the sill, my gasp muffled by the city air. We didn't bother trying to close the window behind us. We fled down the rusty stairs, our feet clanging on the metal, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We burst back into the building, ran down the empty 4th-floor hallway, and took the service stairs 2 at a time, our breath coming in ragged bursts. We exploded out of a side exit and into the late afternoon light, running the block and a half to our car. The drive back through the city was a nightmare of snarled traffic and blaring horns. Ben leaned on the horn, weaving through lanes, earning angry shouts from other drivers. I was navigating on my phone, my other hand clutching the locket in my pocket. Do the math, Chloe, Ben said, his eyes fixed on the gridlocked street ahead. When does her train get in? I pulled up the Metra schedule, my fingers slick with sweat on the phone screen. It's a 47-minute ride. She left Ogilvy at 5:10. She arrives in Northbrook at 5:57. I looked at our navigation app. The estimated arrival time at my parents' house, with the heavy evening traffic, was 6:25 p.m. Ben, I said, my voice hollow. She's going to be there for almost half an hour before we are. A cold dread washed over me. 30 minutes. An eternity. Anything could happen in 30 minutes. The image of the desecrated photo of my mother in the locket flashed in my mind. The rage it represented was deep and violent. "We have to call them," Ben said frantically. "We have to warn them." "And say what?" I shot back, the impossibility of our situation crashing down on me. "Hi, Mom and Dad. The daughter you told me was dead is on her way to see you. And by the way, I know everything." They'll think I've finally lost it completely. Or worse, it will give them time to run, to hide, to call Finch, to disappear with their secrets forever. No, we can't call. So we call the Northbrook police. Tell them there's a potential intruder. An intruder who looks exactly like their daughter? An intruder they might lie to protect? The police will just make it worse. We have no idea what we'd be sending them into. The awful truth settled over us. There was nothing we could do but drive. We were powerless, racing towards a confrontation that would already be in progress, a fire that would already be burning by the time we arrived. My mind spun with horrific possibilities. What was her plan? Was the one-way ticket a symbol of finality? Was she there to hurt them for what they did? For the first time, I felt a confusing, sickening pang of fear for the parents who had betrayed me. Their lies had created this monster of rage, and now that monster was knocking at their door. Did they deserve what was coming? I didn't have an answer. By the time we exited the highway and sped through the quiet, familiar streets of Northbrook, the sun had set. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the houses were lit from within, cozy squares of yellow light promising warmth and safety. It was a lie. We killed the headlights and coasted to a stop a block away from my parents' house, in the exact same spot we'd parked before. From here, the house looked deceptively peaceful. Lights were on downstairs. My father's blue sedan was in the driveway. There were no flashing police lights, no ambulances, no signs of a violent struggle. The silence was more terrifying than sirens would have been. "Stay here," I told Ben. "Like hell," he said, getting out of the car with me. We moved like shadows, sticking to the edge of the manicured lawns, our feet silent on the damp grass. The air was cold and still. As we got closer, we could hear the faint, muffled sound of a television. My stomach twisted. It was all too normal. We crept up the side of the house, staying low, until we reached the large bay window of the living room. One of the heavy curtains hadn't been pulled completely shut, leaving a narrow, vertical gap. Holding my breath, I put my eye to the cold glass and peered inside. The scene was not what I expected. There was no blood, no screaming, no fight. My mother and father were sitting side by side on the floral sofa, their backs ramrod straight, their faces pale and strained. And sitting directly across from them, in my father's favorite wingback armchair, was Anya. Her posture was perfect. Her hands were wrapped around a delicate teacup and saucer that she held in her lap. Her portfolio case rested on the floor beside her. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't threatening. She was talking, her expression as cool and composed as if she were at a business meeting. A quiet, civilized, and utterly terrifying family reunion was already underway. Time seemed to slow down and thicken, the world narrowing to the small, illuminated rectangle of the living room window. We were voyeurs at the funeral of our own family, watching a ghost hold court in a room full of memories that were now all poisoned. The scene inside was a masterpiece of psychological terror, far more chilling than any screaming match could have been. The silence from our position outside was a torment. We couldn't hear the words, only the low, steady murmur of Anya's voice, a constant, controlled hum that dominated the room. We were watching a silent film, forced to read the story in the rigid lines of our parents' bodies and the cold composure of the woman wearing my face. My father, David, a man I had always known as confident and resolute, looked diminished. He was shrunk into the cushions of the sofa, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at Anya, but at the coffee table, as if the polished wood held the answers to a question he was too terrified to ask. My mother, Carol, was even worse. She was a statue of fear, her hands clutching a decorative throw pillow like a life raft. Every few moments, Anya would make a small gesture with her hand or tilt her head, and my mother would flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, as if bracing for a blow that never came. And Anya, she was magnificent in her control. The rage I had seen in the desecrated locket was nowhere to be found. It had been distilled into this diamond-hard composure. She was the interrogator, the prosecutor, and the judge, all wrapped in a calm, unassuming package. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her teacup, placed it silently back on its saucer, and continued speaking, her body language relaxed and open. She was not the one in danger here. She was the danger. What do we do? Ben whispered beside me, his breath fogging the cold glass. "We can't just stand here. And we can't go in there," I whispered back, my eyes never leaving the scene. "Look at her. She's in complete control. We have no idea what she's capable of or what she's planning. If we burst in, we could make it 1,000 times worse." We were trapped, forced to watch and wait for the strange, tense performance to reach its conclusion. We were waiting for the spell to break, for the quiet to shatter. And then, the scene shifted. Anya placed her teacup and saucer on the coffee table with a soft, definitive click. The sound, faint as it was, seemed to echo in the silent room. The conversation stopped. She leaned down and reached into the black portfolio case resting by her chair. My body went rigid. This was it. The moment the civility ended. I braced myself, my mind flashing with images of a weapon, a knife, something to bring the violence she so clearly felt to the surface. But what she pulled out was not a weapon. It was a simple, beige manila folder, much like the one we had taken from the attic. It looked thin, almost empty. She held it for a moment, her gaze fixed on our parents. Then, she leaned forward and slid it across the surface of the coffee table. It came to a stop directly in front of my father. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. My mother looked from the folder to Anya's face, her own expression a mask of confusion and dread. Anya said something, her voice still a low murmur, and then leaned back in her chair, a silent invitation. "Open it." With a hand that trembled visibly, my father reached for the folder. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the cover, before finally taking hold of it and pulling it into his lap. He opened it. Ben and I were too far away to see the contents, but we didn't need to. We saw it all on our parents' faces. My father's face, already pale, went completely slack. The carefully constructed mask of paternal authority he had worn his entire life dissolved into nothing. He looked utterly and completely broken, his eyes wide with a horror that seemed to hollow him out from the inside. My mother, seeing the look on his face, let out a soundless gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She leaned over to look at the contents of the folder. Her reaction was even more stark. A strangled sob escaped her, and her entire body seemed to crumple, folding in on itself as if she had been physically struck. Whatever was in that folder, it was not an accusation. It was a verdict. It was the source of Anya's power, her checkmate in a game we didn't even know she was playing. Having delivered her final, devastating blow, Anya stood up. The meeting was over. She picked up her portfolio, her movements unhurried and graceful. My parents didn't seem to notice. They were still staring at the open folder, lost in whatever fresh hell she had just revealed to them. Anya walked towards the front hall, out of our line of sight. "She's leaving," I hissed, grabbing Ben's arm and pulling him back from the window. "Hide." We dove into the deep, inky shadows of a large rhododendron bush at the corner of the house just as the porch light clicked on, flooding the manicured lawn with a harsh, yellow light. The front door opened. Anya stepped out, pulling the door shut behind her. She stood on the porch for a moment, her face illuminated. It was a blank mask. There was no triumph, no anger, no satisfaction. There was nothing. She was an empty vessel. Then, she calmly walked down the flagstone path, her footsteps silent, and disappeared into the darkness of the quiet suburban street. The porch light clicked off. The door remained closed. A profound, heavy silence fell over the house. Anya was gone. The immediate danger had passed. But we were left in the cold and the dark, outside a house that now contained the wreckage of our family. And the only thing left to do was to go inside and face it. For a full minute, we stood in the shadows of the rhododendron bush, the silence from the house pressing in on us. Anya was gone, a phantom who had appeared, delivered her verdict, and vanished back into the night. We were left with the wreckage. The closed door of my parents' house was like a vault, sealing in a truth that had been festering for 20 years. And I knew I could not leave this street until I had opened it. "I'm going in," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Chloe, are you sure?" Ben asked, his hand on my arm. "Whatever she did to them in there." "I have to," I interrupted, my gaze fixed on the front door. "I'm done watching through windows. I'm done chasing shadows. I need to hear it from them." I pulled the old house key from my keychain. It was worn and smooth, a key I hadn't used in years but had never been able to throw away. It felt heavy in my hand, like the key to a tomb. We walked up the flagstone path, the porch light now extinguished. The sound of my key sliding into the lock was unnaturally loud, a sharp, metallic violation of the quiet. The lock turned. With my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm, I pushed the door open and we stepped inside. The house was steeped in a thick, suffocating silence. The faint sound of the television news was still trickling from the living room, an absurd counterpoint to the emotional devastation that hung in the air. We walked into the room and stopped. It was just as we had seen it from the window. My parents were still on the sofa, unmoving. My mother was now weeping silently, tears tracking lines through her makeup, her face buried in the throw pillow. My father sat staring into the middle distance, his expression utterly blank. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out, leaving only a fragile shell behind. On the coffee table between them lay the open manila folder. They didn't seem to notice us at first. They were lost, trapped in the wreckage Anya had made. "You have 60 seconds, I said, my voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. "You have 60 seconds to start talking before I walk out that door, and you never see me again." My father's head snapped up. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled not with anger or denial, but with a bottomless, soul-deep weariness. The fight was gone. The lies were exhausted. He looked at Ben standing beside me, then back at me, and a flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossed his face. "Chloe," he began, his voice a dry rasp. "You have to understand." "No," I cut him off. "No more understanding. No more explanations. Just the truth. What really happened at the lake." My mother let out a choked sob. My father closed his eyes, a pained expression on his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind a man takes before a final confession. "It wasn't an accident," he said, his voice flat and dead. "We lied. It was never an accident." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "She tried to kill you, Chloe. Clara tried to kill you." He told me the story in a monotone, the words tumbling out as if rehearsed 1,000 times in his own mind. Clara's problems weren't just tantrums. They were violent, unpredictable rages. She had hurt animals. She had started a fire in the garage. And she had a terrifying, obsessive fixation on me, her other half, her mirror. That day at the lake, it wasn't a race. It was an attack. She had held my head under the water, smiling, and it had taken all of his strength to pull her off me. "We were terrified," my father whispered. "We took her to specialists. We found Dr. Finch. He told us she was a danger to you, that the only way to keep you safe was a complete and permanent separation. He said as long as she knew you existed, she would never stop trying to erase you. He called Meadowbrook a sanctuary. Faking her death, it was his idea. The final, clean break. A way to protect you, to let you have a normal life, free from fear." "A normal life built on a lie," I said, the words dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "You didn't protect me. You erased her. You buried my sister alive, and then you made me mourn her. We did it to keep you safe," my mother cried, her voice muffled by the pillow. "Safe." The word was a mockery. I looked at these two broken people who had built my entire life on a foundation of sand, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty distance. My eyes fell to the folder on the table. The source of Anya's final, quiet victory. "What is this?" I asked, walking over and picking it up. "What did she show you that was so much worse than what you'd already done?" I looked inside. There was no confession, no blackmail. There were just a few pages, stapled together. It was a medical file. At the top of the first page was Anya's name, and next to it, a diagnosis. A string of complex, clinical words I didn't recognize. I flipped the page. It was a letter, addressed to my parents, from a neurologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My eyes scanned the text. As we discussed, Anya's diagnosis of Huntington's disease, a rare, autosomal dominant genetic disorder, is unfortunately confirmed. The degenerative nature of the illness is progressing as expected. Huntington's disease. I vaguely knew the name. A terminal, incurable illness that destroyed the mind and body. Given that Huntington's is a hereditary condition, and that you have another daughter who is her identical twin, it is a statistical certainty that she carries the same genetic mutation. I cannot stress enough the importance of having Chloe tested immediately. While there is no cure, early intervention and treatment can significantly impact her quality of life. The letter was dated 6 months ago. The words on the page began to swim. Genetic disorder. Identical twin. Statistical certainty. The walls of the room seemed to tilt, the air growing thin and hard to breathe. This was Anya's checkmate. She hadn't come here for revenge for the past. She had come to deliver a death sentence for the future. My future. The lie wasn't just that my sister had died. The ultimate, most unforgivable lie was the one they had allowed me to live every single day. The lie that I was the healthy one, the lucky one, the survivor. The words on the page were not just letters, they were a spell, transforming the world I knew into something alien and terrifying. Huntington's disease. Genetic disorder. Statistical certainty. The floral pattern on my mother's sofa swam before my eyes. The sound of her weeping faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. The very air in my lungs felt different, thinner. My own body, the vessel I had lived in for 27 years, suddenly felt like a stranger's house, a place I was only renting, and the eviction notice had just been served. This was a grief beyond anything I had ever known. The grief for Clara had been a ghost story, a sadness for a life that was lost. This was a grief for myself, for a future that had just been stolen from me. The life I had planned with Ben, the career I was building, the simple, uncomplicated hope of growing old, all of it dissolved in the clinical, cruel prose of a doctor's letter. Ben's arm came around me, strong and solid. He had read the letter over my shoulder, and I felt the small, sharp tremor that went through his body. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just held me, his presence an anchor in the storm that was ripping my world apart. "We're leaving," he said, his voice low and firm, meant for my ears alone. "We're leaving now." He gently took the folder from my numb fingers and placed it back on the coffee table. He started to guide me toward the door, a silent, steady pressure on my back. We were almost in the hall when I stopped. There was one last thing. One final question that needed an answer. Not that the answer truly mattered anymore. The damage was done. I turned and looked at my parents. My father had his face in his hands. My mother was staring at me, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Did you know?" I asked. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of any emotion. It was the calm of a deep, frozen lake. "When you sent her to Meadowbrook, in all of Dr. Finch's reports and evaluations, did he ever once mention that Clara's issues could be neurological? Genetic?" I took a step closer, my gaze boring into them. "Did it ever, even once, occur to you to have me tested?" My mother flinched as if I had struck her. My father couldn't look at me. He just shook his head, a gesture of denial that was utterly unconvincing. Their silence was my answer. They hadn't known for sure, perhaps. But they had chosen not to find out. They had clung to the simple, clean story of the bad twin, because the alternative, that their family was touched by a biological curse, was too much to bear. They had sacrificed one daughter to the lie, and in doing so, had condemned the other to ignorance. "I see," I said softly. And with that, I turned my back on them. I let Ben lead me out of the front door, into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never set foot in that house again. The final thread that connected me to the people who raised me had just been severed. The drive back to Chicago was a silent, somber journey through a world that looked the same but felt fundamentally different. The city lights seemed harsher, the shadows deeper. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at my own hands in my lap. I kept expecting to see them tremble. Every tiny muscle movement in my body was now suspect, a potential harbinger of the coming decay. My perception of Anya had been completely upended. I had seen her as a threat, a monster, a figure of vengeance. But the reality was so much more complex. The conspiracy board wasn't a plan of attack, it was a desperate search for understanding. She had studied me, the replacement, not to destroy the life she'd lost, but to comprehend the woman who shared her face and her terrible fate. Her cruelty had been precise, almost surgical. She didn't just mail me the diagnosis. She didn't confront me with it in a coffee shop. She took the truth and placed it in the hands of the people who had created the lie. She forced them to see the full scope of their betrayal. She had weaponized the truth, aiming it not at me, but at them. The threat she had made in the park replayed in my mind. "Stay away from me if you know what's good for you." It wasn't a threat at all. It was a warning. She was a mirror, showing me the broken reflection of my own future. We arrived at my apartment, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken fears. Ben held me for a long time at the door, his embrace fierce and protective. "We'll face this," he whispered into my hair. "Whatever it is, we face it together." I wanted to believe him. But as I stood in my living room, the life I had built now feeling like a stage set, I felt utterly alone. I pulled the tarnished silver locket from my pocket and opened it. I stared at the bright, smiling face of my young mother, and the violently scratched-out space beside her. I finally understood the rage that could lead a person to do that. Just then, my phone, sitting on the counter, began to ring. The sound made us both jump. The screen lit up with a familiar, dreaded sight, blocked ID. Before, my heart would have hammered with fear. Now, it was strangely still. The old chase was over. A new, more terrifying one had begun, but this time, we were on the same side, whether we wanted to be or not. My sister, my twin. We were bound together not just by our past, but by the biology that was ticking away inside both of us. Ben looked at me, his eyes asking the question. I gave him a small, determined nod. This was not a call to be ignored. It was a summons I had to answer. I picked up the phone and swiped to accept. I held it to my ear, my breath held tight in my chest. The line was silent. There was only the faint, static-filled sound of someone else's breathing. She was waiting for me to speak first. All the names, all the lies, all the fear fell away. There was only one word left that mattered. One name that was true for both of us now. Clara, I said into the silence. A beat of silence hung on the line, a hollow space filled with 20 years of lies. Then, a voice. It was the same low, steady voice I'd heard in the park, but now, stripped of its hostility, it was simply weary. So, the voice said, flat and devoid of inflection. The replacement finally knows her real name. The moniker, which had seemed so cruel on the corkboard, now just felt like a sad, simple fact. In her story, that's what I was. I ignored the label. Why did you call? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. To confirm receipt of the message, she said, her tone as clinical as the doctor's letter. Did the liars perform as expected? Did they tell you the story of the bad seed and the monster at the lake? The bitterness in her words was subtle, but it was there, a sharp, metallic undertone. They told me, I said, and I saw the file from Meadowbrook, and the folder you left for them. Good, she said, a hint of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but perhaps grim finality in her voice. Then you know what they are, and you know what we are. We. The word landed with a quiet, devastating weight. In that single syllable, she erased the line between us. There was no more me and her. There was only the tragic, plural pronoun. The board in your apartment. I began, the question forming slowly. Why were you watching me? Wouldn't you? She countered, a flicker of emotion, perhaps impatience, finally entering her voice. If you found out you had a ghost, a perfect copy of yourself living a life that was supposed to be yours, wouldn't you want to see what the liars had built in your place? I needed to know who you were. If you were one of them. If you were happy in the garden they grew on my grave. Were you going to tell me? I asked, my voice cracking slightly. About our inheritance? The term she used was perfect. A terrible, cursed inheritance passed down through our blood. Eventually, she said. My plan was to dismantle the lie first, piece by piece. To force them to confess. The diagnosis, that was the final move. The truth they couldn't run from. I just didn't expect you to speed up the timeline by breaking into my apartment. There was no accusation in her tone, just a statement of fact. She knew. Of course she knew. A person that meticulous would have noticed the disturbed dust, the forced drawer, the slightly ajar window. A heavy silence fell between us. We were two strangers, bound by the most intimate connections possible. A shared womb, a shared face, and a shared, ticking clock embedded in our DNA. We need to meet, she said, her voice dropping the last of its coldness, replaced now by a simple, stark command. There are things you need to know. Things that aren't in any file. Things Finch did. Things they paid him to do. My mind recoiled. There was more. More horror than I had already uncovered. Tomorrow, she continued, not waiting for my reply. Noon. Lincoln Park. The bench by the Alfred Caldwell Lily Pool. Come alone. How will I know it's not a trap? The question was out before I could stop it, a reflex born of weeks of fear. For the first time, I heard a sound that was almost a laugh. It was a dry, bitter, humorless puff of air. A trap, she said. Chloe, look in a mirror. The trap was set for us the day we were born. I'm not the enemy. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. I relayed the entire surreal conversation to Ben, who had been watching me with a look of intense concern. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. I walked over to the counter and picked up the locket. I opened it again, staring at the empty, scratched-out space where my father's picture should have been, and the pristine, smiling photo of my mother. My conversation with Clara had unlocked something, a memory, deep and fragmented, that had been buried for years. I was 5, maybe 6. It was a birthday party. A friend of ours had given me a beautiful porcelain doll. Clara had wanted to hold it, but I, in a rare moment of possessiveness, had refused. I remembered the look on her face. Her expression had changed in a way that was terrifyingly fast. The smile vanished, replaced by a blank, cold look. She had snatched the doll from my hands and, with a calm, deliberate motion, smashed its porcelain face against the corner of the fireplace hearth. I remembered the screaming, mine, the other children's. But most of all, I remembered the look on my mother's face as she grabbed Clara's arm. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, cold, unmistakable fear. The truth had always been there. I just hadn't known how to see it. "You can't go," Ben said finally, his voice tight. "Chloe, it's too dangerous. You don't know what she's capable of." I closed the locket, the metal cool against my palm. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. But it was being drowned out by something else, something new and urgent. It was the need to know. The need to understand the rest of the story from the only other person who was living it. I turned to face him, my expression leaving no room for argument. "Ben, don't you see? It doesn't matter if it's dangerous," I said, my voice filled with a strange, grim certainty. "She's not just a part of my past anymore. She's my future. She's the only person on this entire planet who knows what's coming for me. I have to go." The morning of the meeting dawned gray and overcast, the sky a flat, colorless ceiling that seemed to press down on the city. Every mundane detail of my morning routine felt charged with a heavy, dreamlike significance. The taste of my coffee, the feel of the water in the shower, the sight of my own reflection in the mirror, it was all different now. I was looking at a ghost, a woman whose future was a map already drawn by a cruel, invisible hand. Ben was a wreck. He hovered near me as I got dressed, his face tight with anxiety. "Let me come with you," he pleaded one last time. "I'll stay 100 feet away. She won't even know I'm there. Chloe, please." I touched his cheek, my heart aching for the pain I was putting him through. "If she sees you, she'll bolt. This is the only way, Ben. I have to do this alone." We compromised. He would drive me to Lincoln Park and wait in a cafe across the street from the zoo entrance. I would keep my phone in my pocket, and if I didn't text him an all-clear message every 15 minutes, he would call the police. It was a flimsy safety net, but it was the only one I could offer him. The cab ride to the park was silent. I watched the familiar streets of Chicago slide by, the city's vibrant life a stark contrast to the quiet decay that was now my future. I held the locket in my pocket, its edges worn smooth, its weight a tangible link to the girl I was about to meet. She was my past, a living ghost of a shared childhood. She was my future, a terrifying preview of the illness we now shared. She was my sister. The Alfred Caldwell Lily Pool was a hidden world, a serene oasis tucked away from the noise of the city. A stone path wound its way around a tranquil pool of water, surrounded by lush foliage and prairie school-style stonework. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was beautiful, a place designed for quiet contemplation. The irony was suffocating. This peaceful sanctuary, a place of water, was where I would finally meet the twin they told me had drowned. I found the bench she had described. It was weathered and secluded, overlooking the still, dark water. I sat down and waited. Every rustle of leaves, every distant shout from a child in the park, made my heart leap. Then, I saw her. She didn't appear suddenly. She simply walked into view along the stone path, her hands in the pockets of a long, dark coat. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. In the clear light of day, the resemblance was even more jarring. It was like looking at a version of myself from a parallel universe, one where life had been harder, colder. The lines around her eyes were deeper, and her expression was guarded, closed off. She stopped in front of the bench and looked at me, her eyes, my eyes, taking in every detail. There was no greeting, no smile. "You came," she said. It was a simple statement of fact. "You knew I would," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. She sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a careful, deliberate space between us. For a long moment, we just sat in silence, two identical strangers, staring at our reflections in the dark water. "I was diagnosed 3 years ago," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was flat, clinical. "After the tremors started in my left hand. I thought it was from drawing too much." She looked at her own hand, flexing her long, slender fingers. "They told me what it was. They told me what to expect. The shaking, the memory loss, the paranoia, the rage, the slow dissolving of the self." She was giving me a roadmap of hell, her tone as detached as if she were reading a weather report. "They told me it was genetic," she continued, her gaze shifting to me. "They asked about my family. I told them I didn't have one, but I knew. I knew I had a perfect, healthy copy out there in the world. And I knew they had never told you. Why didn't you contact me then?" I asked. Why wait 3 years? And say what? She retorted, a flicker of the old bitterness returning. Hello, I'm the monster your parents buried, and by the way, I've come to give you your death sentence. No. Before I told you what was going to happen to us, I needed you to know what was done to us. Her gaze hardened. You read the file from Meadowbrook. You think you know what happened there. You don't. She turned to face me fully, her eyes burning with a cold fire. Finch's containment therapy wasn't just being sent to my room. He had a place he called the quiet room. It was in the basement. No windows. Soundproofed. He would leave me in there. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. In the dark. In the silence. Until the world outside my own head ceased to exist. He wasn't trying to heal me, Chloe. He was trying to break me. To see how much a mind could take before it snapped. We weren't his patients. We were his lab rats. The horror of her words washed over me, cold and sickening. This was the truth that wasn't in any file. Our parents paid him for that, she said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. They paid for his silence, and they paid for his experiments. That's what my father's visit was about last week. The money. Making sure the monster stayed fed and quiet in its cage. The pieces all clicked into place, forming a picture more monstrous than I could have imagined. I finally understood the rage that could scratch a face from a locket. I looked at my sister, at the woman forged in darkness and silence, and saw past the cold exterior to the terrified 7-year-old girl they had left behind. I didn't come back just to tell you this, she said, her voice shifting, becoming focused, purposeful. I came back to finish it. She leaned in slightly, her eyes intense. They didn't just bury me, Chloe. They, along with Finch, buried others. Meadowbrook was his laboratory, and he was meticulous. I know he kept private records. The real files, detailing every session, every drug, every illegal thing he did to us. The proof of his crimes, and of the parents who paid for them. My heart began to pound a new, different rhythm, not of fear, but of something else. Something like purpose. I've spent the last year searching, she said, and I found out where he keeps them. In a private storage unit, under a false name. But I can't get to them alone. It's a high-security facility. I need access codes, a distraction. I need a second face. She looked at me, her expression unreadable but her intent perfectly clear. They have to pay for what they did, she said, her voice a low, steady promise of retribution. Finch. Our parents. All of them. I'm going to find those records, and I'm going to burn their whole world to the ground. She held my gaze, and in her eyes, I saw my own reflection. I need your help. The proposal hung in the cool, still air between us, as shocking and unexpected as a gunshot in the tranquil garden. Help her. She didn't want my sympathy, my grief, or my support. She wanted a conspirator, an accomplice. She wanted the other half of herself to help her finish a war that had started before I even knew it existed. My mind, already reeling from the diagnosis and the horrors of Meadowbrook, struggled to keep up. My first instinct was pure, instinctual fear. This was insane. It was a vigilante fantasy, a plot from a movie, not something real people did. We would get caught. We would go to jail. But then I looked at her. I saw the unyielding certainty in her eyes, the culmination of years spent in the dark, planning this one, final act of retribution. And I felt the rage simmering inside me, a toxic cocktail of grief and betrayal. What was the alternative? To go home? To schedule a doctor's appointment, get my own official death sentence, and then just wait? To let my parents and Dr. Finch live out their comfortable lives, knowing they had condemned 2 daughters in 2 different ways? The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was taking root. A cold, hard sense of purpose. For my entire life, things had been done to me. My sister was taken from me. The truth was hidden from me. A disease was growing inside me. For the first time, I was being offered a chance to do something. To fight back. How? I asked, the single word feeling like a monumental step onto a battlefield. How do you know where they are? How could we possibly get them? A flicker of something, respect, maybe, showed in Clara's eyes. She hadn't wanted a sister who would cry with her. She wanted one who would ask for the plan. I've been tracking Finch for 18 months, she said, her voice low and efficient. A GPS tracker on his car. Keyloggers on his home computer. He's paranoid, but he's also arrogant. He believes he's untouchable. She explained that Finch kept all his most sensitive material, Not just the Meadowbrook files, but financial records, blackmail material on his wealthy clients, in a high-security storage facility in a nondescript suburb. He visited it once every few months, always at an odd hour, using a false name. The unit requires 2 things to open, she continued. A keycard and a biometric retinal scan. I can clone the keycard. I have the technology. But the retinal scan is the problem. It's tied to him. I can't get past it. She paused, her eyes locking onto mine. But the system has a vulnerability. When they enroll a new client, their network is open for a brief window while the new client's biometric data is uploaded to the server. That's where you come in. The plan was audacious, terrifying, and brilliant. You want me to go in, posing as a new client, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Exactly, Clara confirmed. You'll go through their whole process, sign the paperwork, pay the fee. When they take you to the scanner to register your retina, I'll be patched into their network from a van a block away. While your data is being uploaded, I can isolate Finch's account and swap his retinal data for yours. From that moment on, your eye will open his vault. It was the perfect, twisted use of our identical nature. She needed my face, my eye, my physical presence. She needed her twin. I looked out at the dark, still water of the lily pool. For 20 years, I had lived the life of the lucky one, the survivor. But it was all a lie. My life was never my own. It was a carefully curated story, a gilded cage. Clara was offering me a way to break the glass, to finally, truly be free, even if it was only for a little while. I'll do it, I said, the words tasting of risk and rebellion. A small, almost imperceptible nod was her only reply. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim, featureless black phone. A burner. Encrypted. The only number in it is mine. I'll send you the details. We move in 3 days. She stood up, the meeting concluded. Don't be late. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone on the bench with a stolen locket, a terminal diagnosis, and now, a criminal conspiracy. Ben was waiting in the cafe, a half-empty coffee cup in front of him, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. The relief that washed over his face when he saw me walk in was so palpable it almost broke my heart. It was the last moment of peace he would have. I sat down, and as calmly as I could, I told him everything. I told him about the quiet room. I told him about the money trail. And then I told him about the storage unit, the retinal scan, and the promise I had just made to my sister. The color drained from his face. No, he said, his voice a choked whisper. Absolutely not. Ben, you didn't hear her. I don't need to hear her, he cut in, his voice rising, drawing a glance from the barista. He lowered his tone, leaning across the table, his eyes pleading. Chloe, this is insane. This isn't justice. This is a revenge fantasy cooked up by a woman who has been through hell. It's a suicide mission. You'll go to prison, or worse. This isn't you, isn't it? I countered, my voice quiet but firm. Who am I, Ben? I'm the girl whose entire life is a lie. I'm the woman who has a disease that's going to steal my mind and my body. The old me, the one who followed the rules and trusted people, she doesn't exist anymore. She was never real. The chasm was opening between us, the one I had feared since this all began. He was trying to pull me back to a shore I could no longer reach, a life that was no longer mine to live. I love you, he said, his voice cracking with desperation. And I will not stand by and watch you throw your life away by following her down this rabbit hole. If you do this, if you choose this path, I can't be a part of it. I can't. It was an ultimatum, born of love and fear. He was drawing a line in the sand, begging me not to cross it. I looked at this kind, logical, wonderful man who had been my anchor, my entire world, and I knew I was about to break his heart. I know it's a risk, I said, my own tears finally beginning to fall. But for the first time since this started, I feel like I have some control. It's a choice, and I'm choosing this. I looked at him, my heart shattering with every word. I have to. The space between us and the small cafe booth felt like a canyon. Ben's ultimatum, born from a desperate, terrified love, was a wall I couldn't break through. He saw a woman he loved being led to the slaughter by a ghost from the past. I saw a woman with nothing left to lose, grasping the only lifeline of purpose she had been offered. Please, Chloe, he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. Don't do this. Let's go to the police. Let's hire a lawyer. There are other ways. Better ways. Better for whom? I asked, my own voice quiet but unyielding. For the people who want to keep their secrets. The system has failed Clara her entire life, Ben. And it's failing me. My only option is to trust the one person who has as much to lose as I do." He shook his head, a look of profound sadness in his eyes. He saw that I was already gone, that my loyalties had shifted. "The woman you were a month ago would never have considered this." "The woman I was a month ago was living a lie," I said. "She was a character in a story someone else wrote. I'm not her anymore." He stood up then, placing a few bills on the table for our untouched coffees. He looked down at me, and in that moment, I felt the future we had planned together, the house he was designing for us, the children we had talked about, all turned to dust. "I love you," he said, his voice thick. "Which is why I can't watch you do this. Call me when it's over. If you're still you." And then he walked out of the cafe, out of the life we had built, leaving me utterly and completely alone. The choice had been made, and the price was Ben. I sat there for a long time, the weight of my new reality settling upon me like a shroud. The apartment was a tomb, echoing with the silence of Ben's absence. Every corner held a memory of the life that was now over. I spent that first day adrift in a sea of grief, not just for my lost relationship, but for the naive woman I had once been. Late that evening, a sharp, electronic buzz from the counter startled me. It was the burner phone. One new message. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Address to follow. The message was cold, efficient, and devoid of sympathy. It was also an anchor. It pulled me from my grief and back into the grim reality of the mission. There was no time to mourn what was lost. There was only time to prepare for what was coming. The address that came through the next morning led me to a nondescript, low-rise commercial building in an industrial park near the outskirts of the city. Clara let me into a small, rented office space. The room was stark and anonymous, furnished with only a cheap table and a few chairs. But the walls were covered with large printouts, satellite images of the storage facility, detailed blueprints Ben would have admired, and what looked like guard patrol schedules. This was her war room. Clara was all business. The sister I had met in the park, the one with the flicker of shared history in her eyes, was gone. In her place was a field commander. "The facility is called Secure Archive Solutions," she began, pointing to a blueprint. "The manager's name is Arthur Poe. He's in his late 50s, a creature of habit. You will be Eleanor Vance, a freelance art curator looking for a climate-controlled unit to store sensitive pieces for a client." For 2 hours, she drilled me. She made me memorize my cover story, the fake address and phone number I would use, the layout of the facility's front office. She pointed out the locations of every visible security camera. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her planning meticulous to the point of obsession. This was the result of her lost years, the product of a mind honed by paranoia and a singular, burning purpose. "How did you learn all this?" I asked during a brief pause, gesturing to the complex plans on the wall. She didn't look up from her laptop. "When you're 16 years old with no name, no past, and no one in the world you can trust, you learn to be resourceful," she said, her voice flat. "You learn to watch. You learn to listen. You learn that the only person who will ever save you is yourself." It was the briefest, most painful summary of a life I could imagine, and it explained everything about the woman standing before me. The night before the heist was the longest of my life. I sat in my silent apartment, the burner phone on the table in front of me like a black, unblinking eye. My own phone remained dark. No calls. No texts. Ben was really gone. The fear I had been holding at bay with action and planning came flooding back, a cold, suffocating tide. I was about to commit a serious crime, a step from which there was no return. I was risking prison, my future, everything, on a plan concocted by a sister who was a stranger to me. I took the locket from my drawer and held it tight, the metal pressing into my palm. I was doing this for the girl in the quiet room. I was doing this for the woman I was becoming. A final text from Clara came through just after midnight. "Tomorrow. It ends." I woke up before my alarm, the morning sky still a dark, inky gray. My movements were slow, deliberate. I showered. I dressed in the simple, nondescript clothes Clara had instructed me to wear. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, comfortable shoes. No makeup. No jewelry. I was a blank slate. Eleanor Vance. Before leaving, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. A stranger looked back at me. Her face was my face, but the fear and confusion that had clouded my features for weeks were gone, replaced by a hard, determined set to my jaw and a cold focus in my eyes. The resemblance to the woman I'd met in the park was stronger than ever. I walked out of my apartment, leaving my regular phone on the counter, a silent monument to a life that was over. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the pre-dawn chill, my purpose clear. My name is Chloe Miller, and today, I was going to help my sister burn her world to the ground. The van was parked on a quiet side street 2 blocks from the target. It was a nondescript, windowless commercial vehicle that looked like it belonged to a plumber or an electrician. But when Clara slid the side door open, I saw it was a mobile command center. Laptops were mounted on a custom-built console, their screens displaying a mosaic of security camera feeds, scrolling lines of code, and architectural blueprints. The air inside was cool and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. Clara didn't look up when I climbed in. Her focus was entirely on the main screen, her fingers moving deftly across a keyboard. "You're late by 2 minutes," she said without emotion. "Traffic," I replied, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "Traffic is a variable. I accounted for it," she said, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were sharp, analytical. She wasn't seeing a sister, she was assessing a tool for the job. "Are you ready?" I nodded, unable to speak. "You are Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice a drill sergeant's monotone. "An art curator. You are storing delicate sculptures for a private client, the artist Jonathan Carmichael. The pieces require a stable, low-humidity environment. You are professional, slightly demanding, and in a hurry. You will not make small talk. You will answer his questions and nothing more." She handed me a small, flesh-colored device. "Earpiece. I'll be listening. I'll talk you through it if you get into trouble. Don't touch your ear. Don't even look like you're listening. Just follow the script." She handed me a wallet containing a fake driver's license and a credit card, both in Eleanor Vance's name. "Go now. Arthur Poe is at the front desk. He's alone." The walk to Secure Archive Solutions was the longest 2 blocks of my life. The building was a monument to anonymity, a sleek, gray facade with no windows and a single, smoked glass door. It radiated a cold, sterile sense of importance. With every step, Eleanor Vance's story solidified in my mind, a fragile armor against the sheer terror that was threatening to consume me. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into a silent, chilly lobby. A man who matched the photo from Clara's file sat behind a high, imposing counter. He was in his late 50s, with thinning hair, spectacles, and a prim, disapproving set to his mouth. "Arthur Poe. Can I help you?" he asked, his voice as dry as old paper. "Yes," I said, my own voice a stranger's, cool and professional. "I'm Eleanor Vance. I have an appointment to rent one of your climate-controlled units." For the next 10 minutes, I gave the performance of my life. I filled out the paperwork, my hand surprisingly steady. I answered his questions about the dimensions of the sculptures and their insurance value. The entire time, Clara was a silent presence in my ear. When Poe asked a particularly detailed question about the artist, her voice was suddenly there, a calm whisper in the back of my mind. "Carmichael. He works with reclaimed metal. Mention the risk of oxidation." "The main concern is oxidation," I said to Poe, echoing her words. "Mr. Carmichael's work is quite delicate." Poe nodded, satisfied. He stamped the final form and stood up. "Very well, Ms. Vance. If you'll follow me, we'll get your biometric data registered, and then you'll be all set." This was it. The critical moment. He led me through a secure door and into a small, white, sterile room that contained a single chair and a complex-looking machine. "Please have a seat and place your right eye up to the optical scanner." I sat down, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I leaned forward, the machine's cold plastic cup pressing against my eye socket. A series of red lights focused on my pupil. "Enrolling new client," Poe announced to no one. "Beginning data upload." A soft whirring sound started. In my ear, Clara's voice was sharp and focused. "Okay, he's in. The port is open. I see the data packet. Now for the hard part. Finch's file is under the alias Prometheus." "Of course it is. Arrogant bastard." I held my breath, trying to keep my eye perfectly still. Poe was humming softly to himself, oblivious. "He's got a nasty encryption key, but I was expecting it," Clara whispered. "Bypassing now. I've isolated his biometric file." "Okay, Chloe, hold steady. I'm swapping the core identifiers. It's like replacing one photograph with another in a sealed envelope. The system won't know the difference. The upload is starting. Your data is replacing his." "Done. The network just authenticated your retina as the key to Prometheus's unit." A pause. "We're in." The whirring stopped. A green light on the machine blinked. "All right, Ms. Vance, all set," Poe said cheerfully. "Your eye is now your key. Welcome to Secure Archive Solutions." He handed me a new, blank keycard for the unit I had officially rented, and walked me back to the lobby. I signed the final piece of paperwork, my hands moving on autopilot. I thanked him, my voice a distant echo. The walk back to the van was a blur. I didn't remember my feet touching the pavement. I slid the van door open and practically fell inside, my body finally succumbing to the adrenaline, shaking uncontrollably. Clara didn't look up from her screen, but there was a new, focused intensity to her movements. "You did well," she said. It was the highest praise I could imagine receiving from her. I thought it was over. I thought we would go back to her office and plan the next phase for another day. I was wrong. "Phase 1 is complete," she said, pulling up a new set of schematics on the screen. She pointed to a schedule. Poe takes his lunch from 12:30 to 1:30 every day. The afternoon guard, a man named Henderson, is lazy. He doesn't do his first patrol of the corridors until 2 p.m. That gives us a 70-minute window, starting in 45 minutes. She turned to face me, and in her hands were 2 key cards. One was the blank one Poe had just given me. The other was an identical card, but I knew it was a clone of the one that would grant access to the high-security corridor where Finch's unit was. She handed me the cloned card. Her eyes were as hard and cold as steel. "Good job, Eleanor," she said, the name a cold slap of reality. "Get a hold of yourself. Now we go back inside and finish it." The 45-minute wait in the van was a unique form of torture. The adrenaline from my performance as Eleanor Vance had worn off, leaving a shaky, nauseous void in its place. I watched the countdown timer on one of Clara's screens, each second stretching into an eternity. I was about to walk back into a fortress, not as an actress with a script, but as a thief. "Aren't you scared?" I asked, the question a quiet tremor in the van's humming silence. Clara didn't take her eyes off the security feeds. "Fear is a luxury," she said, her voice flat. "It's an emotion for people who have other options. I spent my life being scared. This is different. This is control." She finally looked at me, her eyes holding an intensity that was almost hypnotic. "You go in, you use your card for the lobby, the cloned card for Corridor C, Unit 317. The retinal scanner is to the right of the door. Once you're inside, find the filing cabinet labeled M Project. The records are in there. Fill the bag, walk out. Do not run. Do not look around. Just walk out." At 12:31 p.m., we saw him on the camera feed. Arthur Poe, locking the front desk and walking out the main door, a brown paper lunch bag in his hand. "He's out," Clara said, her voice sharp. "The desk is clear. The clock is ticking, Chloe. Go." My body moved on its own. I grabbed the empty messenger bag, took the cloned keycard, and slid the van door open. The walk back to the facility was different this time. The street was quieter, the world holding its breath. The sterile gray building loomed ahead, a silent, sleeping dragon. I swiped the keycard Poe had given me, Eleanor Vance's keycard, at the front door. A green light blinked, and the lock buzzed open. I stepped into the empty, silent lobby. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system. I was a ghost in a machine. I walked past the vacant front desk and through the first security door, which opened with my own keycard. I found the entrance to Corridor C. It was a heavy, windowless metal door, with a different card reader glowing red. This was the first test. I pulled out the cloned keycard Clara had given me. My hand trembled as I swiped it. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the light switched from red to green, and a heavy magnetic lock disengaged with a solid thud. The corridor was long, white, and sterile. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a single, monotonous note. My footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floor. The doors were all identical, gray metal rectangles with numbers stenciled in black. 301, 303, 305. It felt like walking through a mausoleum. I found it at the far end, Unit 317. There it was. The retinal scanner. A small, black circle of glass, the final guardian of Finch's secrets. This was the moment of truth. Either Clara's hack had worked, or a silent alarm was about to bring my world crashing down. "Okay, Chloe," Clara's voice whispered in my ear, a lifeline of calm in my storm of panic. "Just like before. Nice and steady." I took a shaky breath and leaned forward, pressing my eye to the scanner. The red lights flickered to life, bathing my vision in a crimson glow. The machine whirred. A second passed. 2. The light stayed red. It didn't work, my mind screamed. It failed. Then, a soft, high-pitched beat and a loud, visceral clank as the heavy lock on the door disengaged. My knees almost buckled with relief. I grabbed the handle, pulled the heavy door open, and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The unit was larger than I expected, and obsessively organized. Metal shelves lined 3 of the walls, filled with labeled archival boxes. Against the far wall was a set of industrial-grade, locked filing cabinets. On a small metal desk in the corner sat a single, disturbing object, a porcelain doll with a cracked face, identical to the one I remembered from my childhood. A trophy. "Don't get distracted," Clara's voice commanded in my ear. "The filing cabinet. The lock is standard. I have the master key code. Punch in 8-1-5-9. I went to the cabinet and punched in the code. A green light blinked, and the cabinet unlocked. I pulled open the top drawer. It was labeled M Project. Inside was a tightly packed row of thick, manila folders. Each had a name. I saw names I didn't recognize, and then, about halfway through, I saw it, Miller, Clara. My breath hitched. This was it. The full, unabridged story of what they had done to her. I reached for the file, my fingers closing around the thick cardboard. But as I pulled it out, my eyes caught on the folder next to it. It was thinner, but the label on it made the blood drain from my face. Miller, Chloe, Control. My own name. A file. In Finch's private vault. My mind reeled. Why? Why would he have a file on me? What did Control mean? What is it? Clara's voice was sharp in my ear. What did you find? My voice was a choked whisper. There's a file. For me. My name is on a file in here. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For the first time since this all began, I had information that Clara didn't. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. The cool, detached commander was gone, replaced by a new, sharp urgency that bordered on panic. "That's impossible," she hissed. "I've been through all the digital records. There's no mention of you. Get it. Get my file. Get your file. Forget the rest for now. Get those 2 files and get out of there. Now, Chloe, go." The sudden raw fear in her voice was more terrifying than anything I had yet faced. I grabbed the 2 folders, shoved them into the messenger bag, and turned to flee, my heart hammering against my ribs. But as I reached for the door, I heard it. A sound from the corridor. The slow, heavy tread of footsteps, and the unmistakable, metallic jingle of keys. The jingle of keys just outside the metal door was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Every muscle in my body seized. I was a stone statue in the cold, artificial darkness of the storage unit, the 2 manila folders clutched to my chest. Beside me, I could feel, more than see, Clara become utterly still. In my ear, her voice was a ghost of a whisper. "Don't move. Don't breathe." The footsteps stopped directly in front of our door. A shadow fell across the small crack of light at the bottom. The keys jingled again, closer this time. My mind went blank with pure, animal terror. This was it. It was over. We heard a grunt of effort, then the scrape of a key in a lock. Not ours, but the one next to ours. "Stupid thing always sticks," a man's gruff voice muttered to himself. A moment later, the footsteps resumed, slow and heavy, receding down the long corridor until they faded into the monotonous hum of the building. For a full 10 seconds, neither of us moved. Then, Clara's voice, tight with adrenaline, snapped in my ear. "He's turned into Corridor D. You have a 90-second window to get to the lobby door. Go. Now." The command broke my paralysis. I pushed the heavy unit door open and slipped out into the empty white hallway. "Left," Clara ordered. I obeyed, my feet flying silently over the polished concrete. "Main intersection ahead. He'll be visible at the far end. Duck into the alcove by the fire extinguisher. Now." I flattened myself into a small recess in the wall just as the guard, a large, bored-looking man, appeared at the opposite end of the long hall. He didn't even glance in my direction before turning down another corridor. "Clear," Clara whispered. "Go straight for the lobby door. Walk, don't run." It was the hardest command I'd ever had to follow. Every instinct screamed at me to sprint, but I forced myself into a brisk, measured walk, my messenger bag bumping against my hip. I swiped my card, pushed through the final security door, and walked out into the blessed, open air of the empty lobby. 5 seconds later, I was out the front door and collapsing into the passenger seat of the van, gasping for air as Clara peeled away from the curb. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical illness. But it was short-lived. The 2 folders sat on my lap, a tangible weight of unanswered questions. The most terrifying part of the mission was still ahead of us. Let's see them, Clara said, her eyes on the road but her attention entirely on the prize. I pulled out her file first. It was thick, heavy, and horrifying. We spread the pages out on the console between us. It was a meticulous record of a soul's destruction. There were Finch's handwritten notes, detailing Clara's reactions to the quiet room with a cold scientific detachment. There were dosage charts for drugs I'd never heard of. There were photographs, small, black and white images of a 7-year-old girl, my sister, looking wild-eyed and terrified. It was the proof we needed, a testament to a crime so monstrous it was hard to comprehend. Then, with trembling hands, I opened mine. The file labeled Chloe Miller, Control. It was thin, only a dozen pages or so. The first was a psychological evaluation, dated when I was 6 years old, a year before the drowning. I remembered it vaguely, a nice man who came to our house to play games with me for a school readiness study. It was Finch. The evaluation concluded I was a perfectly normal, well-adjusted baseline. The following pages were sporadic updates, once every few years. A copy of a standardized school test result. A note from a child psychologist I had seen for grief counseling after Clara's death, clearly obtained illicitly. He was tracking my development, my milestones, my psychological state. The final page was a letter, typed on Finch's letterhead, addressed to my father, dated 5 years ago. And it was here that the last, most terrible piece of the puzzle fell into place. David, it began, as we approached the 20-year mark of our project, I wanted to provide an updated summary. The experimental subject, Clara, continues to show the expected signs of profound trauma-induced sociopathy, compounded by the early onset of the genetic disorder's neurological symptoms. In contrast, the control subject, Chloe, has developed into a textbook example of successful sublimation of childhood trauma into a productive, stable adult life. The data gathered from observing two genetically identical subjects under such starkly different environmental pressures has been invaluable. Your contribution to this longitudinal study will be a cornerstone of my life's work. I read the paragraph twice, the words refusing to make sense. Experimental subject. Control subject. Longitudinal study. My life hadn't just been a lie told to protect me. It had been an experiment. Clara and I weren't the bad twin and the good twin. We were Lab Rat A and Lab Rat B. Our entire lives, our pain, our separation, my grief, her torture, it had all been data for a monster secret, illegal twin study. And our parents had knowingly, willingly, offered us both up on the altar of his twisted science. I looked up from the page and met my sister's eyes. She had read it over my shoulder, her face a mask of stone. The last of the old labels, the ghost, the replacement, crumbled into dust. In that moment, we were not two separate people who happened to share a face. We were one entity, one story, cleaved in two by a crime more profound than I could ever have imagined. The alliance forged in the park was now a bond sealed in blood and betrayal. Our separate missions, her quest for vengeance, my search for the truth, had merged into a single, unified purpose. Clara took the burner phone from the console. Her movements were calm, but her eyes held a new, terrifying fire. "These files are the key," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "They're more than just proof of what he did. There are account numbers in his notes. Offshore holding companies. He didn't just document his crimes, he documented how he was paid for them." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of a fierce, protective solidarity. "He didn't just take my childhood," she said. "He took your entire life and put it under a microscope. Our parents let him. They all have to pay. The old world was gone. The old Chloe was gone. There was only the mission now, the path that stretched out before us, dark and uncertain." Clara was right. This was about more than just exposing a secret. It was about taking back the power that had been stolen from us. "So what's next?" I asked, my voice no longer trembling. Clara looked from the files in my lap to the road ahead, a grim, determined smile finally touching her lips. "Next," she said, "we burn it all to the ground."